Have any council persons in it? Yes, we do. Hello. Would you like to speak now or during the case presentation?
I can probably wait.
Okay, great. Any others? Okay. Okay, great. Just want to make sure we're conscious of our council persons' times. All right, so with that, let me get back to the agenda. The first item on our agenda is always to review and approve or amend the decision letters and meeting minutes from our last meeting. So it's customary for us to do that in a public forum, and I'll give the commissioners about a minute to go through that. We've previously received them by email, and I know I've scanned it and have no objections. And I'll entertain a motion whenever anyone is ready.
I'd second.
We have a motion and a second. A motion by Commissioner Lewis and seconded by Commissioner Simpson. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Seeing none opposed, motion carries. Great. All right. Moving into the, let's see, let me check my agenda. Just make sure. Yep. First case on the agenda today is the Parkwood baseball case. If the applicant can come to the front, we have a modified format today such that the audience can make faces, pull knives, things of that nature while our backs are turned. Legal, please keep an eye out for us, our safety, please. Okay. We are in a police station, so that does help, but I don't see any law enforcement here. All right, I'll give a brief rundown of how this will go down and then let Logan introduce the case. So essentially, you'll have 10 minutes to present your case. If you have slides, they'll be controlled by Ms. Dawn. We will then close the presentation, open it up for public comment. If there's anybody here to speak in favor or against, or any letters received, and then we'll close public comment and open it up to the commission for deliberation. And we may have some questions back and forth to you, and then we'll cast a vote. So with that, I'll let Logan read you your Miranda rights.
Opening statement to the applicant. If you are not satisfied with the decision made by the Stormwater Management Commission, you may appeal the decision by filing for a writ of certiorari with the Davidson County Chancery or Circuit Court. Your appeal must be filed within 60 days of the date of the Commission's decision. You're advised to seek the independent advice of legal counsel to ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements have been satisfied. Case number 1 on the agenda is case 2024-00023, Parkwood Baseball, final variance. At 3017 Aldrich Lane, APN is 06-000005700. Inspector is NPDES, Council District 2, Keonsae Toombs. Applicant's request: disturbance of the stream buffer, allowance of impervious surfaces to remain within the buffer area, continuous mowing and maintenance of portions of the stream buffer, waiver of buffer signage as necessary, and multiple stream crossings within 1,000 feet. Appellant is Habitat for Humanity of Greater Nashville, represented by Corey Hall, Thomas and Hutton. Comments: Stormwater staff. Plan addressed preliminary submittal, MWS staff comment to vary tree species. Codes: no comment provided. Planning: no comment provided. Greenways is not requesting a greenway or greenway easement.
Great. I'll start the 10-minute clock after you do your introductions, and I'll give you a 2-minute warning when we're getting close.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Reed. I'm representing Thomas and Hutton and our client, Habitat for Humanity. We're the civil engineer on the development, and with me today is Franklin Warner, also with Thomas and Hutton. So first of all, I wanted to recognize we have some members of the Parkwood board here today. If you all don't mind standing up, the Parkwood board is here and very appreciative of their time and coming in support of this development, as well as Habitat for Humanity. And then moving on into what we're trying to do with this project. So Habitat for Humanity is involved with Parkwood in order to, at the end of the day, restore and improve the Parkwood baseball fields that have been in existence since mid-1900s. It's really served the community in incredible ways, and it's a really huge opportunity for Parkwood and Habitat for Humanity to improve this park to make it more, even better for the community and to better service the people that they have such a big heart for. And so specifically what the variance is requesting is some of the existing structures on the site and some of the existing pathways, et cetera, are within the stream buffers. And if you look, let's see, I'm sorry, I have to kind of turn around to look at this. So as you can see on here, some of the driveways are generally where the existing driveways were and have been for a very long time. And you can see that they encroach into the stream buffer in the proposed condition. However, I don't know if you have the other existing conditions or not, but the driveways today encroach incredibly so into the Zone 1 and Zone 2 buffers, and then there's no way to avoid it just due to the layout of the site. And so some of what is going on is literally just to provide drive access into these areas that are already impervious today, and to just provide better transportation to meet the needs of the people coming into this park. Then as far as the driveway crossings, there's only one crossing on this site, and it's the driveway. If this driveway was not there, there would be no way to cross the stream that bisects the park. And so it sounds like there's trying to be multiples to provide multiple points of access. However, I want to make it clear that it is just improving a one-way drive aisle right now, and it's the only access on the site, and it's widening it to be a two-way drive aisle across with a sidewalk in order to let people walk around. And then the outfalls into the stream are just, the fields are going to be synthetic turf in order to provide longevity and to increase their value to the community. And so the discharges that are referenced are only under drain discharges. There's no inlets or anything like that that will be part of this. And they'll both be infiltration underneath. They won't be impermeably lined or anything like that. So I think that covers it. So at this time, I'd like to hold on to the last couple of minutes in case there's anything we would like to come back and discuss. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so we'll close the applicant's presentation. Is there anybody here to speak in favor of or against? If you are, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Logan, have we received any letters of support or opposition?
No, we did not receive any letters. I think there may have been a little bit of correspondence with David Withers at TDEC back and forth, but I don't know if that's really relevant right now.
Okay. All right. With that, I'll close public hearing and then open it up to the commission for discussion. And I'll kick off the conversation by saying this was a final. We reviewed a preliminary proposal by the applicant a couple months ago now, I think.
That's correct.
And I think in the staff comments, I saw that the items that we had requested were addressed in their entirety in the preliminary submittal.
Yeah, I can read through those original discussion points that we had, if you don't mind. So we heard them in February 7th, 2024. It looks like we discussed the proposed mitigation plans for the baseball fields and the work, requirements for stormwater treatment and capture, impervious surfaces being added, and requested that they give a little bit more specific measurements as to buffer areas and what was proposed and what was existing within the buffers. Mr. Nathan Oliver discussed the landscape mitigation plan, suggested more clarity be provided on that with a final variance. And the other discussion point seems to be the culvert details and the bridge details.
Okay. Thank you. Can we also frame the context of the disruption and the benefit? So the amount of impervious that was it's currently on site and how much is being removed, and then the net positive impact of that. Do you have that information? Maybe it's in our packet.
So it may or may not be in the packet, but I've been looking at that actually over the last few days as we look towards a grading permit submittal and closing out the grading permit. And so as far as the imperviousness, it's being increased, but only slightly. There's significant amounts of imperviousness being decreased within the buffer zone specifically, though. There's a net deduction and a significant amount. I don't know those specific numbers off the top of my head, but I know it was less than 10,000 square feet of net impervious increase over at the site overall. And so this is not a significant paving project by any means. This is mostly restorative for the fields and enhancement of the buffers. So I hope that answers the question.
Yep. Okay. I think I found that table. There's a net reduction of pavement of about 3,000 square feet. So
Within the buffers.
In the buffers. Okay.
I had one question on the landscape plan. Can you talk through what is happening below the area where you show the trees in that L1.1? There's kind of a tree planting area, and just what happens on the ground plane within that zone?
Are you saying plan south of that planting area?
No, just kind of right there. I'm just curious, below the tree layer, what happens, within the ground plane of that zone? Is it planted with a seed mix? Is it planted with something else? Is it left bare dirt?
That is a great question. And so I'll have to look at our landscape plan, honestly.
Okay. I didn't see anything on there, and so I just kind of wanted to understand what was happening kind of within it, just from a stabilization and long-term kind of management standpoint.
Sure. I believe the idea would be for it to be some sort of grass. And so I would think that a seed mix would make sense in that area. But if there was some specific requirement, then we could explore that.
Yeah, I think looking at the existing conditions in the picture and having reviewed this application, we're certainly leaving the site in a much better condition than it currently is, and it's a community benefit project, and so we do look at those a little bit differently if there's a public benefit aspect, especially for recreation in our neighborhoods. So I want to just point that out to the commissioners as we deliberate this any further. So.
Yeah, I think to answer your first question, I do think some kind of cover within that area. I know that the area to the south you're kind of leaving undisturbed, just as a way to kind of protect and improve, the quality of that stream. And so some kind of cover in that zone, I think, would be a good long-term plan and really improve the overall quality of it too.
Sure. The intention would not be bare dirt, if that addresses your concern.
Yeah, and I think just thinking about, the operational plan of that zone, keeping it, as pervious and stabilized as possible.
Okay. Any other comments if we're working towards a motion? I think this site also has great potential for some collaboration. I know how difficult fundraising is in our nonprofit community, and we appreciate Habitat for Humanity getting engaged and helping bring this ballpark back to life. And maybe for the stream bank mitigation work, the Cumberland River Compact may be a good resource to help with some of the funding mechanisms that they can pull to help you get the mitigation plan implemented.
We appreciate that.
I would move to approve the plan as presented.
Great. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Lewis. Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you, and I appreciate the Parkwood board for being here and the support and the work you're doing in the community.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Habitat for Humanity, as well. Okay. All right. Next case is, Logan, you have it in front of you. Let's see. Estes. Next case is 3702 Estes. If the applicant could come to the front here, and we'll get set up to hear the case. And Councilmember Ewing, would you like to speak now or after the case?
I'd actually like to go
Okay, great. Okay. Okay. All right. I think you guys were here for the introduction. I'll go ahead and tell you again how this will work. You'll have 10 minutes to present your case. I'll give you a 2-minute warning. After that, we'll close the applicant's presentation, open it up for public comment, and then we'll close public comment and open it up for deliberation amongst the board, and we may have some questions back and forth, and then we'll cast a vote. So with that, I'll let Logan introduce the case and start your 2 minutes, start your clock after reintroductions.
Case number 2 on the agenda is case 2024-00024 3702B Estes Road at 3702B Estes Road. APN is 116-120-10500. Inspector is DS, single family. Council District 34, Sandy Ewing. Applicant's request, disturbance of the Zone 1 floodway buffer to remove existing encroachments, disturbance of the Zone 2 floodway buffer to construct a home, pool, and associated appurtenances, uncompensated fill in the floodplain. Appellant is Nathan Harden, represented by Daniel Whitley, Arnold Consulting Engineering Services, Incorporated. Comments, Stormwater staff, no comment provided. Codes, no comment provided. Planning, no comment provided. Greenways is not requesting a greenway or greenway easement.
Okay. With that, I'll let you introduce yourself, and we'll hear your case.
Yes, Daniel Whitley with Arnold Consulting Engineers. We're representing Nathan his request here today. Just to give a brief overview of the project, the existing house on the property currently encroaches within both the Zone 1 and the Zone 2 buffer zones. We are proposing the demolition of that house and restoring the Zone 1 buffer zone back to native vegetation. And then we're going to be pulling the new structure up near the road so that we're only disturbing the Zone 2 buffer zone. We're providing a net reduction in the buffer zones of 1,235 square feet of net reduction of impervious area. And then on the uncompensated fill, due to the fall of the site and pulling the structure towards the road, the grades don't really allow to generate enough cut without further disturbance in the Zone 1 buffer zone. So that's why we're proposing to leave Zone 1 alone, but however, if we could possibly disturb some in the Zone 1, we could generate enough cut to compensate that fill, but we're trying to maintain where we're not disturbing that area. So that's the reason for the uncompensated fill in the uncompensated fill request. I'll let Nathan just give a brief overview of some conversations he's had with zoning, because I think there were some questions from the neighbors about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nathan Harden. Thanks for your time to hear the case today. So this has been a very interesting project for me. I've learned a lot. Thanks to Logan also for all his many answers to my emails over the last couple of years. So I'm just had a chance to read some of the concerns from some of the people in the area. So just for the first time. And so one of those I think that I just wanted to address is had to do with the setback, the front setback on this structure. And so just to clarify, the guidance that I received from Metro zoning is that because this is a private easement rather than a public street, the normal sort of rules about setbacks are a little different. So you can actually build up within 10 feet of the easement according to the ordinance that's in place. And so hopefully that will answer at least that concern. I guess more broadly, just, I think anytime you're building, obviously it has an effect, on neighbors. And so I hope that what I'm doing is not only, in a way, replacing a structure that is, obviously an encroachment, and so that what we would be doing would be an improvement from a stormwater perspective. But I also hope it helps the neighborhood. The house that's there is in poor condition. It, to me, is kind of a blight on the neighborhood. And I hope that just in our conversation today, when we hear some of the concerns that are understandable from, neighbors about disturbing the creek area or the flood area, I hope we can, answer those concerns and let everyone go home realizing that with the help of, the team we've put together, we've created a plan that I think will make this a better situation in terms of flooding or potential flooding than what's there now. So thank you again.
And we would like to just reserve the rest of our time for
Okay.
response. So.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you. Logan, I know we received some letters of comment that the commissioners have in front of them printed out. Did we receive anything else?
No, just the printed letters
Okay.
from neighbors.
Okay. And then Councilperson Ewing, would you like to speak, or if you would come up to the front here where we have a mic and. Right here, yes, please.
Okay. So thanks for that presentation. I have been hearing from neighbors as well. And throughout Green Hills, and I think I said this last time I visited you all, there is a consistent concern about localized flooding and disturbances of the floodway, the buffer zones. This is a real problem. And, I understand there are some historical issues where we have homes that have been built in those zones for whatever reason. And so I appreciate that this project is that they are saying that they will make improvements and that the situation afterwards will be an improvement. I am concerned about the pool aspect of the project. I'm concerned hearing from neighbors about their worries about the creek, about the quality of the creek and disturbance to that, disturbance to what they see to be a pretty good balance between the creek and the land surrounding it and the buffer zones. I'd like to hear maybe more about the landscaping plans that you have. And I am reluctant about this kind of thing only because I do think that as we continue to develop, as we continue to build up, especially in Green Hills, these types of things are opening the door for a lot of disturbances and increasing problems with stormwater. And so understanding that they said that they're going to eliminate the structure that is farther into the buffer zones and pull the new structure back towards the street. I like that aspect, but I do have reservations, and their neighbors are extremely nervous about the impact on stormwater flow and whether it's going to have the impact of pushing stormwater onto their property instead of having the water infiltrate on this property. So anything that you guys can do to be more specific about your landscaping plan would be very welcome to all the neighbors, I'm sure. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay. With that, I'll open it up for dialogue, and we may. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Is there anybody else here in the audience to speak in favor or against? Yes. Come on up.
Thank you. Will y'all put it back on the aerial view of the property?
And if you don't mind, just so you're recorded.
I was going to say.
Okay.
I was just going to point this to you. That's me. So.
Okay.
I'm William Hickey. I am the property to the left of this one in the aerial view, 3702A. I have written in opposition to this floodplain because I have several concerns and questions. I've talked to Mr. Bowman over the years about my property, so I've become very aware of kind of what can be done and what can't be. And my biggest concern is the rerouting of stormwater. You're eliminating a structure that's existing right now. You're bringing it closer to the road. Now we're also adding a lot of infill in there that's going to re-elevate this land. So they have not, I don't think they've addressed whether or not how my property is going to be impacted, which is downstream on there. The second concern about the setback of being 10 feet, while that may be correct, this is a private drive and an easement. It's because of my property that was built in 1940 that allowed this easement for the second property to be on there. And I don't believe, I was not around in 1940 when this was built, but I don't imagine that the idea was years later that a structure could be built 10 feet off the road. That could also result in stormwater accumulating on the pavement in front of the house, causing damage to that structure as well. I'm not a part of the HOA, which is across the street, which is Estes Glen, even though we have quite a few people here. Everybody stand up who's in the Estes Glen subdivision came here today. Okay, so we got 3 of y'all. They've been so kind to maintain this and pave this road in front of our house. And so there's concerns on their part about the number of trucks, if this is approved for the infill, to bring that dirt in and dump it, and the damage it could cause onto that. They've talked about, they've addressed stormwater, but I feel like that really hasn't been addressed about the rerouting of that. I didn't really see anything in these plans that showed that at all. And so that's my biggest concern. I know the neighbor's concern is about a chlorinated or saltwater pool with runoff leakage into the creek. I would love to have a pool in my backyard, but in conversations with Mr. Bowman over the years, he's like, that's never probably going to happen on that. So, and also, we're not certain if this is, and again, I know this is not necessarily a barrier for a developer to come in here and just build a piece of property and leave, but this is we're not sure if this is for personal use or not, and sometimes you kind of take more into consideration if somebody's going to be building this house for themselves as opposed to just putting this up, selling it, getting out of Dodge. And so we have no idea of that. Mr. Harden, nice to meet you today for the first time. Let's see here. So those are the concerns. I wrote an email to Mr. Bowman back on the 18th of July. Also just saying that I didn't believe there's any exceptional physical feature of the property which justifies a relaxation of the zoning regulations applicable to the property. The conditions of 3702B are not unique to that property. I've got the same ones. Mr. Weathers on the other side has his. And all properties in the vicinity suffer the same disabilities in that. So those are kind of all of my concerns. And I think I speak for some of the HOA members too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Hickey. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to come up and speak? If so, please do so. Okay, seeing none.
And I can just clarify, the people who wrote in, too, we didn't say that exactly, but we did get a comment from Mr. William Hickey at 3702A Estes. We got a comment from Barbara Shields on Wimbledon Drive. And we got a comment from Jennifer and Philip Corwin at 4121 Elder Place. And Robert L. Delaney at 234 Burlington Place.
Great. Thank you for stating that for the record. And I want to, this commission, I want to clarify, we will, when we do uphold a due process for the applicant and for the public. One of the things that I want to make sure that we're clear on is the purview of what this commission is tasked with, and that is stormwater components only. And so anything related to setbacks or zoning or traffic or any of those impacts are outside of what we review and discuss as part of this body. So we appreciate the information about what zoning has provided to you, but that is outside of our review. And I know that's been some of the concern from the public. So I've closed. Is that you okay with that? If go ahead, I'll give you 2 minutes. If you want to come up, I'll give you. If you wouldn't mind, please state your name and your address.
I'm Lucy White, and I'm at 3704 Estes Unit J, and that's right across from, or catty corner to this property. The one concern I have as far as the stormwater is that creek bed has a lot of concrete in it, so I'd like it to be considered how things are going to be absorbed because of the concrete. And that's been one of our problems with the flooding in 2010 is the creek couldn't absorb the amount of water. And so therefore, a lot of us were flooded.
Great. I appreciate that. Would you mind turning the mic off there for us too, with the button on the right?
Oh, and also the banks. Is that part of stormwater? How will the banks of the creek be affected?
Yes, ma'am. It's part of the buffers. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. White. Okay. With that, I'll reclose public hearing and open it up to the commissioners for discussion. I've got a couple pieces I want to also clarify. The stream that is on the backside of this property, is that a wet weather conveyance, or is this, which stream is that? That might be a staff. Sugar
It's
Tree.
Sugar Tree Creek.
And is that classified as a wet weather conveyance, or is it a stream, blue line stream?
It's classified as a stream.
Yeah.
And is this part of Sugar Tree channelized like other parts of it are? I know Ms. White mentioned concrete bottom.
The aerial photograph seems to show a portion of a concrete channel over here. I would presume it runs down that way, but I have not been to the property.
Does the applicant know if the creek's channelized? If you wouldn't mind, press the button. Oh, there it goes. It turned on.
It is channelized, and we're not proposing any disturbance to the bank of the creek or the creek itself. We're several feet away from that, so we're not proposing anything to alter the stream or its bank or its channelization. So,
was that stream included in your survey, the channelization of it, top of bank and width of the channel? And
yes, it was.
So
the width of the channel appears to be, it's about, I don't think it's dimensioned on this plan, but it's approximately where it crosses this property. It crosses in that north west corner there. It's about 20 feet wide.
okay.
Yes.
Okay, and I want to, before I turn it over to the commissioners, also just clarify some comments that I got from the public related to the quality of the stream and the buffers and flooding. This commission always encourages for disturbances to occur outside of the buffers where possible, specifically the Zone 1 buffer. There's essentially two buffer zones from the stream bank, Zone 1 and Zone 2. In this case, the current home is in the Zone 1 no disturb. The applicant is requesting to remove that home and build a new one on this property outside of the buffers except for the portion of the Zone 2 disturbed. So from a stream quality standpoint, I think we favor that over a home being constructed or reconstructed in the Zone 1 buffer. So that's maybe one component to add here. And we can dive into some of the other concerns as we deliberate. So with that, I'll open it up.
Looking at the entire lot, not just the buffers itself, do you have a calculation for the amount of current impervious surface area versus what you guys are proposing for the plan that you're presenting?
Yes. Hang on just a moment. It's approximately around 2,500 square feet, and with the footprint we're doing and the new drives that we're constructing, we're taking that down to approximately right around 1,200 square feet of.
For the entire lot, not the buffer area
No,
for
yes,
everything? Okay.
Yes, the entire lot as a whole.
Can you give me those numbers one more time? So the current total impervious in the buffer is what?
It's approximately 25, just in the buffer?
Let's just say yes, in the buffer, I'm sorry.
So just in the buffer, it's 2,066 square feet in buffer zone 1. Buffer zone 2, it's 232 square feet.
And the proposed?
And the proposed buffer zone 1, we currently have 0. Buffer zone 2 is 1,063 square feet.
And so the net reduction of pervious in the buffers is about 1,000.
Approximately 1,200 square feet of reduction, yes.
Okay.
One of the things we did, if I may, with the design, the architect, is the ground floor footprint is actually smaller than the existing house that's on the property. So part of the thinking there was to create as little, displacement in terms of stormwater as possible and as much green space as possible.
And the first floor is considered, it's basically just an entrance into the house with a garage. It's not habitable space.
So it's unfinished ground floor garage space.
I'll channel what former chairman Dodd Galbraith used to say about our buffers is that, we treat them as a sponge in a way. And so anytime we can increase the sponginess of our buffers by removing the impermeability in especially the zone 1 buffer is a benefit to the watershed and the neighbors that surround the site. So I want to point that out that there is a benefit here in moving the house outside of the zone 1 buffer.
Let me just ask really quick, because I just did the math. So you're telling me the amount of impervious surface that is not in a zone 1 or zone 2 buffer is only going to be 137 square feet? My question was not on the zones, but the total amount of impervious surface.
You're talking about the existing structure or the new?
Both. So the existing, I think, was around 2,500 feet. I am asking for the plan that's being proposed. What is the total amount of impervious surface for the full lot?
I know it's a net reduction, but I don't have the total square footage noted because I don't think it was a...
You mean within the buffer or just total?
Nope, just total.
Okay.
Along those same lines too, can you speak to the LID requirements and how you're approaching those on the site as it relates to impervious surface?
So we are actually, and based on our conversations with Logan, the development that we're proposing in that disturbed area does not meet the threshold for providing any additional LID requirements.
And that's because they're reducing impervious area on site. It's not an increase of more than 800 square feet. So they wouldn't be required to meet the infill requirements.
And I can provide staff with a total of the overall net or the overall reduction of impervious. I just don't have it noted on the plan that we have here today.
I think it's what Commissioner Simpson may be trying to clarify, and I understand her question, is that visually, if the pool and the patio are hardscape impermeable, and if the patio, if the driveways and the house are as well, it does not appear as though there is the reduction within the entire site.
And to add to that, you are correct in what I was looking at, as we're looking at stormwater as well, the buffers are very important. But this is obviously asking for a variance because you're going into the buffer, but we also have to look at the total site. So if we are placing a significant amount of additional impervious surface, that water is not going to have a place to seep into. So I'm just taking that into consideration as well.
Give me just a minute. I'm trying to just do some math. So the pool patio area is 569 square feet of impervious surface. So the rest of that surface on the property would be the house and the 2 driveways. And like I said, we're happy to provide staff with a calculation on that. I just don't have it with me here today.
question for staff, potentially. So given the location of the house, they've noted the square footage that would be removed from the Zone 1 and Zone 2 buffer. In terms of the compensating fill, how does the house get calculated in terms of volume and fill? If that's sitting as a block in there, is it calculated at all in terms of removing that from the floodway, or is it just merely looked at impervious?
So I think the house portion is probably not counted as fill because they're going to have flood vents and allow it to flood. The pool portion and maybe the driveways and the fill required.
The existing one, sorry.
The existing house? Yeah. No, I wouldn't count the existing house as fill. Are you saying because they're removing that counts as cut?
Yeah, it doesn't count as cut.
Typically, we don't do that. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to put a pause in the commissioner deliberation. I know there's been a request from the audience for another comment to be made, and so I'll reopen public comment for a 2-minute case. If the applicant could come.
Just want to declare, he was able to pull up the house plan. So the house footprint on the lower level floor is 1,187 square feet, which includes the garage and the lobby. So if you add that to the pool area that I just gave you, you're looking at about it's about 1,700 square feet of impervious surface.
Does that include the driveways?
Yeah. No, that doesn't include the driveways. The driveways are 18 feet and 15 feet wide.
I think the roof area would be, unless you're doing some kind of other surface on the roof, I think the roof area would probably be the impervious.
Well, I think the goal of having the lower level floor be smaller is everything else around that is, that's green space. So it would be considered pervious.
But the driveways would not. I'm assuming, do you all plan on doing concrete?
They're currently
driveways?
proposed as concrete, but we're happy to provide those as pervious pavers or something like that would be a more pervious material.
Okay. All right, I'll put a pause in the commissioner deliberation, and I'll reopen public comment. If you would please introduce yourself and your address, and I'll start the 2-minute clock.
Thank you. Excuse me. My name is Debbie Gregory. I live at 3704 Unit H, right across from the property Mr. Harden is proposing to build upon. I've lived there 25 years. I was there as well as Lucy in the 2010 flood. The creek is whatever minimal, it doesn't matter. We saw the impact. The raging river literally on our private road is on top of just the impact of the water flow. It's a beautiful natural habitat for all kinds of animals, wild and it's very personal to me. I just don't see how they can come and tear down a piece of property that was a part of it. The water turned literally around by that house and saw it for 2.5 days. Any disturbance to the creek is huge and will impact not only below, and we're at the bottom of Green Hills. There's 6-foot wide pipes that drain off of Green Hills into Sugar Tree Creek. And it took a lot of, it woke up, the whole 2010 flood woke up all of Middle Tennessee and water flow. And to do any further disturbance or deviation to whatever they minimizing the impact is going to be huge above and below where this property is. And like I said, I've lived there 25 years. I plan on that being my home forever. And any disturbance cannot happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hit a button.
All right.
Can I speak, Mr. Chairman?
I'll close public hearing, and then we're going to go back to deliberation. Is it okay for me to? Yeah. You have a response to the?
Yes, so as far she mentioned about disturbance of the creek, we're not proposing any disturbance. I just want to reiterate, we're not proposing any disturbances of the creek itself. And we're actually, right, with the reduction of the house that's in the zone 2, we're actually opening that up as more pervious surface. So that actually pervious surface would be not as bad as an impervious surface that's there. But
May I speak briefly, Mr. Chairman? I just wanted to just recognize Mr. Hickey, Debbie, Ms. White, Councilperson Ewing, everyone who came out here obviously spent their time to come out to this meeting and obviously has concerns that, I think I want to address as fully as I can since they took the trouble to come be here. And so I was wondering if I could just draw everyone's attention to the vegetative mitigation plan, just so that there's some understanding about the how much of this property we are, in a sense, letting it go back to, a sponge, in a sense, is what this is designed to do, to soak up more rain and more flood water. We're not just leaving the lawn as is. We're proposing that this would become, essentially an extra benefit in terms of potential floodwater or stormwater to the entire neighborhood as a compensation that might address some of these concerns that these nice people have come out to voice.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Based on the location of the new plans, it looks like we're going to have to cut down some trees on the front. Can you tell me the amount of trees that will be removed and then what the proposal is for the amount of trees to be replanted?
Yes. That's in the plan.
yeah, so it mainly to construct the house, those trees that he's showing as existing trees in the front, those would have to be removed, and he is showing the addition of some new trees in the back there, where we're proposing the native vegetation.
I see that, but do we know the total? Because we're obviously taking trees off of the current site, and while I know some of those trees are not in the buffer, I think we've seen in Nashville the removal of trees. There can be a cumulative effect over time.
Yes, if you look on the panel to the side there, you can sort of see the vast majority of those trees fall directly, that we would be proposing to remove, fall directly within the footprint of the new house. And so the current mitigation plan doesn't call specifically for more trees. It's a native grass blend that he's proposed in that area where the existing home is.
There are 10 trees that would be, in order to build the house, that would have to be removed in order to construct it.
All trees that are in the floodway itself will be preserved under this plan, as far as I can tell here.
So 10 trees removed, but no trees to be replanted.
There are,
Under the current plan, I believe that's correct.
yeah, he's proposing I guess in lieu of that, he's proposing the native C mix is what the landscape architect, and we're also proposing the hedgerow that's directly behind the house that kind of delineates where the buffer zone 1 starts.
So there are, I believe, how many of these? There are 28 native shrub that
28.
he's proposing to plant across that sort of border where the Zone 1 flood buffer starts.
And the native seed mix that he is specifying, the landscape architect, is an American Meadow Southwest Native Grass seed mix or equal.
think to follow up
sorry.
on Commissioner Simpson, did you have something?
Did you say native bushes were being planted?
Yes,
Butterfly bush?
Correct?
that's what the architect or the landscape architect was proposing, yes.
It says it's not native to Tennessee or North America.
Oh, my mistake. Okay, so put it this way, 17 butterfly bushes, 11 American beautyberries. Thank you.
To follow up on Commissioner Simpson's question, I think with the disturbance with the Zone 2 buffer and through that disturbance, the removal of, it looks like, at least 7 trees within the Zone 1 and Zone 2 buffer, I think it is important and appropriate that those are a part of the mitigation plan at a minimum, and think that it should be considered as we're thinking about disturbance and kind of what's going back.
And we're happy to do more.
Yeah.
If that's the commission's request.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try to frame this now into the categories that I'm hearing from the commissioners too, that are all very, very valid. Starting with number 1, the removal of the home within the Zone 1 buffer, and then the rebuilding of the home outside of the buffer, I think is one topic. Number 2, the mitigation strategy for the disturbance of the Zone 2 buffer that Commissioner Simpson just started to discuss, related to the trees and the landscaping and the mitigation plan for that impact in the Zone 2 buffer is number 2. Number 3, which we haven't really talked about in length yet, is the 200 yards or 200 and whatever the number is, cubic yards of uncompensated fill in the floodplain. That's another topic that I'd like to start talking about now, to start to form a motion. So with that, were you all able to provide a no-rise study for the uncompensated fill?
We have not been requested to do that yet, but we can, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did staff have any comment from working with the applicant about the uncompensated fill and the strategy to mitigate that? And how much is it really across the site? I mean, what are we raising the pad to now?
227 cubic yards is what they're asking for. So I think if you wanted to allow that, you could, or you could, possibly work on something where they cut into the Zone 1.
The finished floor is where the new house is going is approximately 2 feet above the existing grade. Where the lobby is. The garages are a little bit lower than that, but. And to echo what Logan said, we discussed that with Logan about mitigating the uncompensated fill, but we were trying to avoid the Zone 1 further disturbance. We can easily compensate the fill if we can disturb further into the Zone 1 and generate that additional cut. But we wanted to present this first, and if that was something that the commission wanted us to look at, we're more than happy to work with Logan on that.
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity to leave the site in a better condition than it currently is in some ways, and I think we can work through a mitigation plan to get there. I'm always in favor of trying to remove structures out of the Zone 1 buffer or as close to the floodway as possible. But now we've got to fine-tune the mitigation. So I think that'll also cure a lot of the neighbors' concerns related to stormwater and the stream and the water quality and those pieces. I think you've got an opportunity to make this site better than it currently is. But we've got to have a more robust plan related to the mitigation. The removal of the trees in the front and in the buffer is a big one. The uncompensated fill is also one that we need to probably have a little more a better strategy around. I think a no-rise study would be helpful in this case. And then a proposed plan to mitigate the uncompensated fill in the Zone 1 buffer would certainly be something that we could entertain here. I don't know if staff has any more comment on that part. Right. Okay.
I think one thing to add to that too is while the footprint of the house you noted to be 569 square feet, I believe from an impervious area standpoint, we don't count anything undercover as being pervious. So we would count the roof as the pervious area. And so I think having those calculations and being able to understand what that total is would be very helpful.
In comparison of what it is now and the future.
Yeah.
To include existing driveway.
Yeah, having a more comprehensive review would be helpful.
So I think you've been hearing some good feedback, not only from the commission, but from the residents, which I think was probably a first for you today. I don't know, I think I heard the comment that you hadn't really
We haven't
seen those concerns yet. So I want to make sure there's opportunity, given that there's concern from the neighborhood, from the council person, and I see opportunity to make a more robust mitigation plan. I do think that, again, removing the old house that is in the buffer is a positive, and now you just got to find ways to make the impact that the new impervious surfaces are having with a more robust mitigation plan. So I guess I'm asking, do you want to defer and take our comments and come back to the commission? And work with staff to tailor that plan based on what you're hearing. So I'm afraid if we cast a vote, I'm not sure if it's going to be favorable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to that. I guess I was hoping we could just sort of get your comments now and sort of agree to them. But if you feel like we need to have another hearing, is that what I'm hearing you saying?
Yes. Okay. I think there's opportunity to work with staff based on the comments you've heard here related to those three categories that I laid out, and then some others that I may have missed in our deliberation and with staff comment to come back. But I want to give Mr. Hunt an opportunity to voice his opinion.
One note I would make, given some of the comments about discharges from the pool, and I think this should be standard process, but the back flushing of filters, or if it's going to be a saltwater pool, would be an illicit discharge. So if this does move forward and you are able to do it, those sorts of discharges would need to be accommodated without discharging them to the surface.
Got you. So I'm amenable to what you're suggesting, Mr. Chairman. Just so I understand what you are suggesting, one of the things is that I think I'm hearing is that if we come back with a plan that compensates in terms of the fill in the Zone 1 area where the current house is, and perhaps if we add back some trees in that area, is that also something I'm hearing?
I don't want to provide direct guidance from a design standpoint, but we do need to perform a no-rise study to evaluate the fill in this floodplain and how it impacts the surrounding area. And I think that, we need to have some more objective data and information to make an objective decision versus it being subjective on the mitigation due to the uncompensated fill. So I think working with your design team would be good for that. Same thing goes for your landscape architect. I think there's opportunity to make up for the removal of the pretty significant amount of trees in the front of this lot. You are moving this house to the very front edge that's allowed for this private road, and I think there's opportunity there to kind of satisfy or tailor the home within the site in a way that improves its current condition from a stormwater perspective. We talked about pervious pavers for the driveway, things of that nature. So,
sure. I think too, just for the commission's sake and kind of our discussion, I think too, thinking about the compensating fill that's there and understanding whether it's part of the house or whether it's part of the patio and amenity area outside of the pool, I think would be helpful to understand the differences, because I think we have to look really carefully at it, as a lot of the discussion has been today, and really consider the two somewhat in different categories, I think, from a house and a pool, and kind of the request for it. So as you're looking at it, I think having a deeper understanding of those two differences would help in further evaluation.
Just so I understand, sir, are you asking for us to come with calculations with or without a pool? Is that
I think having more calculations and understanding what the difference is between the structure that you're proposing and then what the difference is between the other surfaces that you're also raising and proposing.
Yeah, because the pool is mostly in the Zone 2, so we just need some more information related to the mitigation strategy. Yeah.
The last piece of advice I would give to any applicant is to take a look at our Stormwater Management Committee manual. It outlines the factors that we look at when making a determination. So I would always recommend to take a look at that and tailor your plan in part to the factors that we're going to be looking at in that determination.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to answer any more questions, but I would take your advice and defer. And I think with kind of some of the feedback we've heard from neighbors and from you all, we can come back with a more robust mitigation plan.
Okay, great. Anything else from the commission, Mr. Lewis? Anything else to add? Good. Okay. All right, great.
What would that next meeting date be, Logan?
The next meeting would be September the 5th. I don't know if you're expected to do a no-res study. I don't know if you can get that done in a timely manner, so it may be up
Just one question. If we are able to provide some cut from the Zone 1 buffer, if it's in the footprint of the house we're demolishing in the first place, would the no-res study still be required? If we can prove that the field has been compensated. Only reason I ask that because a no-res study does incur a considerable expense for a residential house. So,
If you don't mind, Mr. Hunt, I'd like for you to provide the response to that request.
I have to apologize because I'm not involved in a subtle nuance, but I believe if it's not within the floodway,
there's no requirement for a no-res. This would be outside of our normal operating procedures to require a no-res within the floodplain only.
I think what the commission is saying is we have to make a determination to make sure that this isn't affecting the neighboring properties and how they are coming to us for a variance, something that is outside what is required in the regulations. My understanding is we were asking for that as a commission, not as a requirement of maybe Metro Stormwater, but for us to make a determination whether we can actually grant this variance in light of the factors that we have to review.
if we are able to compensate the field, we would then remove that variance request. We'd only be asking for a disturbance in the buffer.
It may be possible for him to show a no-res in another way. I mean, without not getting into the actual model itself.
Yeah.
Certify that it's a no-res because these factors are being addressed.
Considering that, I would work with staff to determine the impact downstream based on you being able to balance the site or not being able to in a way that doesn't provide any adverse effect downstream. Does that satisfy your questions?
Yep.
Great. All right. We'll see you in a month or two.
Thank you. Appreciate your help.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Does anybody need a quick break? Are you good? Quick break. Okay. All right. Let's take a motion for a 5-minute break. So moved. We'll see you all in about 5 minutes. All right, folks, I'm going to start to call the meeting back. To order. It's 9:51. I hope to get everybody out of here before our scheduled end time, which is at 11:30. 11:30?
I think we have to be out of here by noon, technically. But
Noon? Okay.
let's
Shoot for 11. For 11. I know we have a very efficient applicant that's coming up next. So with that, I'll call the meeting back to order. It's 9:51. This is the August 1st Metro Water Services Stormwater Management Commission meeting. And we are on our last case, and that is the Nashville Gun Club. I think the applicant's been here before and knows the rules and has at least heard it a few times today, so I'll spare you from that piece and let Logan introduce the case.
Case number 3 on the agenda is case 2024-00026, Nashville Gun Club preliminary, 1100 County Hospital Road. APN is 069-0000-6800. Inspectors NPDES, Council District 1, Joy Kimbrough. Applicant's request. The appeal request is for the following. MWS staff interpretation of 1564-170 of the Metropolitan Code of Ordinances. Preliminary variance request is for the following. Disturbance of the floodway to construct a building. Continuous mowing and maintenance of portions of the floodway. Waiver of buffer signage is necessary. Appellant is Nashville Gun Club, represented by Andrew Walters, Catalyst Design Group. Comments, Stormwater staff. Staff has met on multiple occasions with the applicant and does not believe this meets the allowance of 1564-170 Section F. Codes, no comment provided. Planning, no comment provided. Greenways is not requesting a greenway or greenway easement.
Great. With that, I'll let the applicants introduce themselves. If you would turn on the green button on the mic, and then I'll start your 10-minute clock after introductions.
We go first?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Andrew Walters, Catalyst Design Group, as was mentioned. Just appreciate staff's guidance today and help. This is a complicated, complex project, so there's been a lot of back and forth and conversations.
Mr. Willis, can I let the other people introduce themselves to you?
Yeah, I was just going to introduce.
Okay,
Lila Teasley is with me. He's the owner's rep for Nashville Gun Club. And then John Michael is here from Thompson Burton, counsel for the gun club. And so Lillard will be presenting with me. We're going to take our whole 10 minutes, so if you don't mind, I'll probably just read my comments, so they'll try to be efficient, and John will answer questions if they come up on a legal sense. We're also joined by members of the community. I think some of them may want to speak publicly here in a bit.
Okay.
So just some brief history of the site. This site is actually owned by the state. It's leased by Nashville Gun Club, which is a Tennessee nonprofit organization. Back in the early 90s, there was some grading work that was done to export some material to the nearby landfill. And so they borrowed from this site, took it to the landfill, and actually did raise the berm that, if you've been out there, the gun club sits on, and there's a parking area from elevation 410 to about 413. And at that time, the existing small clubhouse and concessions building was built. The FEMA 100-year floodplain in this section of the Cumberland River is right at 411 even. It's important to note that the existing building is constructed on top of the existing berm, and it sits at elevation 415.4 and actually did not flood during the 2010 event. It got right up to the stairs. And so as you can see from the package before you, the proposed plan is to add a new public recreational facility on top of the existing berm in place of the current asphalt parking lot, which is there. And this would be overlooking the Cumberland River. So highlights of the plan: has approximately 6,050 square feet of open air pavilion, and then 6,700 square feet of supporting concession, storage, restroom, and support facility space. It's really important to note this project will have no disturbance inside the 100-year floodplain or floodway as defined by that elevation 411. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. The existing drive access and recreational facilities will be left undisturbed, and the total disturbance of the project is actually only 0.6 acres, so it's a relatively small project in terms of its footprint of disturbance, basically putting the building down right where the parking is now. And so Logan sort of touched on this. We're actually here really in two aspects. And the first one, obviously there's an appeal request of whether the project complies with the section 1564-170B. If that's successful, I think we would like to then move on to having a preliminary meeting about a buffer disturbance, but there's really no point in going there unless we sort of get over this appeal. So we're making the appeal and really have two parts to that. as far as our case before you. So part one, by stormwater's own definition in the manual, the project is not located actually in the FEMA floodway. The floodway, and I'm reading, just quoting the definition here, means that portion of the stream channel and adjacent floodplain required for the passage or conveyance of the 100-year flood discharge. And further on goes, the definition goes on to say that the floodway boundaries are placed so that a 100-year flood discharge can be conveyed through the floodplain. And that's important context. So when the elevation's at 411, obviously the floodway is at 411 or below that elevation-wise. And that begs the question, well, how do we interpret the floodplain limits? Is that by mapped location or by elevation data? And we would argue, and I think contextually you guys would know this, that both stormwater manual and the historical precedent within the department has been that the floodplain elevations are defined using that elevation data. And we see that where the floodplain may vary in terms of its graphic location, but we use the elevation data to define those limits. And in this case, if we were asked to calculate the amount of disturbance, for example, in the 100-year floodplain, that amount would be zero because we're entirely out of the floodplain with our disturbance. We have no earthwork or cut and fill to quantify in the floodplain. And so we've got that cross-section. Can you pan to that? Okay, there's this cross-section exhibit, which is part of the handout that we've developed. Hopefully that helps kind of graphically represent and show what we're talking about. And you'll note that, again, the floodplain, floodway limits are at 411, and the new structure is going to be proposed at 4.5 feet above that elevation, which is consistent with what the current structure is there now. And therefore, the new structure is not located in the floodway and should not be subjected to that section 1564-170, in our opinion. That said, even if the floodway is granted, at the location that staff is interpreting, our proposed structure, we feel, qualifies for the exemptions which are listed under 1564-170B. And those allow for the Stormwater Division to approve such a structure in the floodway, provided that it complies with the following. That it's designed and engineered in such a manner so as not to have an adverse impact. It includes facilities associated with recreational athletic fields, such as dugouts, bleachers, concession stands, storage buildings, and other similar structures or facilities. Given the nature of the public recreational activities which take place at this site and the specific needs for this type of athletic facility, we believe the phrase that other similar structures or facilities allows for this building to comply with this language. And as a result, we'd respectfully ask that you grant the appeal that this structure is compliant with the section 1564-170 of the code. And so with that, I'll turn my remaining time over to Mr. Teasley, who can tell you a little bit more about the gun club and the benefit they provide to the community.
Good morning. Hey, I'm Willard Teasley. I'm a local engineer. You don't normally need me to be amplified. I'm Willard Teasley. I'm a club member. I'm also a local engineer. I'm functioning as an unpaid project manager for the club. The Nashville Gun Club is a nonprofit company whose mission is to promote shotgun sports, including trap, skeet, sporting clays, international trap, police, and feed task. The Nashville Gun Club is on land owned by the state of Tennessee, but leased by the club. Typical users of the gun club include regular local users, youths from middle school through college, tourists, new hunters, shooters, and anyone that enjoys wing shooting. There is an option for every member, every person that visits, to become a member. The only entitlement of membership is a discount on the targets. The facility is completely open to the public. The Nashville Gun Club is open Tuesday through Sunday from 9 a.m. to sundown. Based on the most recent completed year, we've got some statistics to kind of highlight the benefits that this facility provides to the community. This past year, the club hosted 378 events. 71 were charity events that were used as fundraisers for a variety of causes, including things like the Tennessee Farm Bureau Shoot Out Hunger and Lily's Garden, that is a Vanderbilt Children's Hospital Cancer Fund. 147 of the events were corporate sponsored by companies from all over the U.S. These events include things like the Middle Tennessee Delta Waterfowl fundraiser, the Service Bank Client Appreciation. 160 of the events were bachelor parties, bachelorette parties, and friend events. Public non-member users average more than 15,000 people annually. The facility serves as a practice facility for 10 different local youth teams that are, again, children ages from middle school through college, and they practice on average 7 to 8 months per year. The club hosts the local tournaments for these youth organizations, and that includes the city events, the regional events, and the state events. During the state event, the club hosts 3,700 competitors over the course of a week and their families. The Nashville Gun Club generated more than $172,000 in sales tax revenue for the city and the state last year. That's kind of a highlights of what the club does.
Got about a minute left.
And with that, we'll reserve the rest of our time and turn it over to any public speakers.
Great. All right. We'll close the applicant's presentation, and we'll open up public hearing. But first, Logan, receive any letters or emails or blimps?
No, nothing on this case.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience to speak in favor or against? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, there's one. If you wouldn't mind coming on up to the mic here and state your name and address. But before you do that, press the button on the right to turn on the mic. And you'll have 2 minutes to present.
My name is Ashley Tone, 2955 Asbury Lane. I represent Tennessee Wildlife Federation. I run the Scholastic Clay Target Program, which is the youth program that provides youth ages 9 through college across the state. I just want to say that this facility is critical to our program and what our mission is, which is to get more kids involved in outdoor activities and promote firearm safety across the state of Tennessee. And this new proposal would greatly increase our ability to facilitate athletes, train new coaches to promote more firearm safety, and just overall enhance the experience that our participants do. This is a huge facility. It's the only facility big enough in the entire state of Tennessee for us to hold our state championship. So it's a completely vital piece of our program, and we could not operate at the success being the third largest youth shooting program in the nation without their support.
Great, Ms. Tone. Thank you. We certainly need to get kids outside more often these days. But okay, any other members in the audience that are here to speak in favor? Yes, come on up.
My name is Gary Fouts. Today I'll be, Murfreesboro, Tennessee is where I reside, 609 Tyboro Avenue. Today in this capacity, although I do spend a great deal of time serving the SETP community as a volunteer coach, I have a shooter and kind of approaching this as a small business owner and a father. Had the privilege of retiring from the U.S. Navy on the East Coast, married a girl from here, so I was a transplanted local 20 years ago. What drew me to the area was the culture of the rich outdoors. We decided to transplant here post-service. And 2 of my 5 children have enjoyed the shooting sports, but we gravitated towards the facility of the Nashville Gun Club, have watched it grow over this last 2 decades and become a staple for youth. I just came back from a 21-day tour in the national championships as our children were trying to compete for the Olympics, next Olympics, not Paris. And what I witnessed in the state of Ohio, the state of Michigan, the state of Illinois, and the state of Indiana is they have a lot of micro clubs, but they don't have a facility that they can come to, they can congregate and really develop and hone their skills at a competitive level like Ashley has created for the state of Tennessee. And we found that in Nashville Gun Club. So wow, Lillard, you said there's 10 that use it routinely. That's their home course. There's 35 in Middle Tennessee, and of course there's 90 teams across the state that we navigate to the Nashville Gun Club because it is the premier shotgun shooting sports facility in our region. Great staff, know how to handle our children and including our parents, and do a great job of putting on youth events, keeping us all safe. So I think it would be an amazing thing if we could do this.
Appreciate that, Mr. Fouts. And thank you for your service. All right. Anybody else here in the audience to speak? Okay, great. Seeing none, I'll close public hearing and open it up for deliberation. I do want to make sure I understand the applicant's request here. I'm looking back at the application, but I heard in the presentation that it may be a two-pronged request.
I might be able to help with
Great,
this.
okay.
Okay, and we have legal counsel here, so she can let me know if I am going the wrong direction here. But so there is an appeal in front of us, and there are two different arguments associated with the appeal. The first argument is that while Metro MWS staff has made a determination this is in a floodplain. So they're asking us, what my understanding is, to either agree or disagree with them. If it's not in a floodplain or a floodway, then we don't even get to the exemptions. Am I heading in the right direction?
You are on the right track.
Okay.
Yes.
This is the first time since I have been on the commission that we have been asked to make this kind of determination as to whether something actually is in the floodplain. If we determine it is in the floodplain, then they have a secondary argument that therefore it falls in the exemption associated with athletic fields in those buildings. It's specifically, I think, the 1564 170B exemption F that we're looking at. So then we make a determination whether our interpretation of that exemption, if this would qualify to fall into that exemption. If then we say it does qualify into that exemption, that is when we would then get to our regular normal sort of what we do, I think, on the normal course of business as to whether we can, whether we would grant this variance under our normal factors and exceptional hardship test. So we have to kind of break that down one by one. And then ultimately, I think when we're talking about the appeal, one of the things we're looking at is, do we even have, if we get to the exemption portion, the second half, that is, do we have the authority as this commission to even be able to hear the variance?
Yeah, I think she said it actually really well, and I'm happy to elaborate. But I think the threshold issues before you talk variance or mitigation or any of those things is you have to resolve the Metro Code issue, the floodplain issue. So you got two things that you need to look at first, and I would take it one by one, and then I'm happy to help if you get bogged down.
Great.
And I do want to make clear, the applicant, without us making this determination, could be in a weird appellate sort of situation. So that's one of the reasons I believe that they have to come before the commission. Otherwise, they may get stuck in a weird limbo place. And we don't want that. We want to make sure that they have due process and can move forward with any appeal if they get an adverse ruling.
Yeah. Appreciate the fine legal representation on both sides that we have on the board and in staff today. So thank you for that well-explained situation. Okay, so let's take this one by one. I would like to hear a little bit from staff on. I didn't see much feedback in our packet related to whether it's in the floodway or not.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, let me touch on that. So our maps, the determination of what's in the floodplain, what's in the floodway is defined by the modeling that is done by the Corps of Engineers, and then the model prepared by the Corps of Engineers is submitted to FEMA, where it goes through additional study and evaluation, and then they create a flood map. And in the case of this, there's a little complicating kind of an aspect to this in that there's additional modeling going on as we speak. But nonetheless, the most current flood maps that cover the Cumberland River and all of the city of Nashville were adopted by the city council in 2017. And in 2017, what was done was that the maps were updated from the 2001 maps, but they were updated based on the LIDAR. We've been flying every 2 years or so. We fly new LIDAR across the entire county. And so what we received from that 2017 mapping effort was updated LIDAR, updated topographic data, and that became part of the release of new panels. All 156 panels were re-released in 2017, showing that new LIDAR, new topographic information. It did not update flow data in the river, which is what we're undertaking right now. Since 2017, we've had 2 new releases of map panels, but all they did, the 2022 and the 2024, adopted in June of this year, were smaller releases of updated panels. And these were creeks and trips to the Cumberland River and around the county that had never been modeled or mapped in the past. So that's a process. Ongoing now is work by the Corps of Engineers to update the flow data in the river. And they're capturing a span of data that goes back in excess of 100 years. And so everybody that is along the Cumberland River has to deal with the fact that there's new data coming. There's a good bit of data already prepared by the Corps of Engineers, but it's not released data, except that we've had discussions with the mayor's office, because obviously everybody on the east bank of the Cumberland River downtown and the River North area downtown we're having discussions with them relative to the fact that we know that the flood elevations in the river, in a new release of maps coming in the future, is going to go up somewhere between 2 and 3 feet. The base flood elevations will increase by 2 and 3 feet. And in fact, and I'll touch on a memo from the Corps, we know that at River Mile 181, which is where the gun club is, we know that the base flood elevation is going to rise by 2.18 feet in that area. But dealing with the maps as they exist, as they're adopted, the floodplain is defined by that model and through that reach, and it is, as Andrew pointed out, I think it's 410. Right now, by FEMA's, by the Corps of Engineers data, it's about 410.9 or something like that, just short of 411. So 411 feet based on the 1988 data. So the work done in the modeling process to define the floodway of the creek, it's a modeling exercise where the Corps in their modeling begins to impinge from both sides, kind of model additional fill, until you get to the point where you raise the level of the base flood elevation by a foot. And then when you get to that point, you say, okay, that defines where the base flood elevation lies. And so it's everything in between, not base flood, that defines where the floodway is. And it's between those outer limits and everything in between. There are not any precedences in town to say, in the metro area, that says that because you've got a berm that's been elevated in the middle of that somehow creates a zone that's not in the floodway, because the floodway runs from here to here. There also is no precedent, I think, for the concept that if you create a little berm that runs down the absolute top bank of the river, that somehow that becomes then a buffer. As we enforce buffers, typically we measure buffers from the extremes, the extents of the floodways out. The 50-foot zone 1, the 25-foot zone 2 is measured outside that buffer. All of it's in the floodplain. The portion that's defined by the map is in the floodway. I think that kind of... Yeah.
So to kind of bring it back around, so what we are being asked today, so the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA has put together the map. As we sit here today, where they want to build, it is within the floodway and floodplain based on that map.
Right.
So what we would be asking, what we're being asking as commissioners, is to make a determination that that basically the Army Corps of Engineer and the FEMA maps that have been,
Prepared and adopted. yeah.
prepared and adopted, that we would be deviating from those and making
Right.
a ruling that would not be accurate for this parcel.
Right.
Is that my understanding? I may be.
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization. And I think that, too, the other thing that we have to be, from a staff perspective, that we have to be concerned with and cognizant of is that as we deviate, as we do things different than what our maps show defines what our conditions are, then we have to defend that action to FEMA. Every 5 years when we go through our big 5-year review, we have to provide copies of all of our variances and the decision letters we've written and things like that, and defend to them that we haven't. And it's based on our regulations. It's based on our ordinances, so I mean, and that can lead you back, I think, to the ordinance itself, and that ordinance that defines a section that's contained in 1564.170. That was an ordinance passed after the flood in 2010. And that was an ordinance that city council members came to us and said, we have 10,000 structures in the city of Nashville that are impacted by this flood. And what can we do to prevent that from happening in the future? And the original passage of that ordinance, the section A up there, is really defined by the opening sentence. It says, no new structure shall be constructed within the floodway. And then it goes on to describe, the effective date of the ordinance, and there are subsequent sections that were added under section B. As time went by, all of this didn't happen at the same time. It was just that first paragraph. And then 6 months later, the city council came back and said, okay, we want to modify this a little bit. And the first 4 of those sections, A, B, C, and D, were passed. And they deal with things that are kind of just routine, because we had a request from a city council member, I think it was Harding Academy, exists adjacent to a floodway of a creek over in the east part of Balmead. And they said, we're out of parking on our campus. We need a place to park. And we've got this section down below that's in the floodway of the creek. Can we just put a parking lot down there? And we were like, okay, if you excavate and pave, and there's no net gain or loss in floodplain storage, that doesn't really hurt anything not to allow them to park in that area down there. That's kind of the basis for that. And it goes to the Parks Department also. A lot of our greenway trails follow along creeks and rivers, and they're in floodplains and they're in floodways. And if we excavate and pave a parking path that follows the river down there, that doesn't add or detract from the storage that exists in the floodway.
Well, let me ask this before we get to the exemptions.
Okay.
If the chairperson doesn't mind, I know that they've brought counsel. I want to make sure that I'm not mischaracterizing the request, and I would like to give them an opportunity, since their counsel is here, to clarify what that initial request is. So I would ask, you heard kind of my ask earlier.
Yeah, I think you summarized it perfectly. You summarized it better than I could have. So appreciate the clarity that you brought to that. And I would say, so just in response to some of the things Roger's indicated, very appreciative of the staff, and I understand their perspective to sort of be forward thinking. Our perspective is simply that we have published maps that have published data. That's the best that we have. We can speculate where it's going to be years from now, but what we have is the data. So a couple things, and maybe a clarification. I believe what Roger had indicated is that while the map was updated a few years ago for the floodplain elevations, and that's the 411, the flow data, meaning the definition of the floodway, was not updated. I believe is what, and I think you mentioned maybe that actually dates back to the 80s. Which would make sense because this, as I mentioned, this was done in the 90s. And so the flow, the floodway line, the graphic line, has not been updated to reflect the current conditions. And so again, so now what we're doing is going back and again, our precedent and I think staff precedent is simply that, and even in the manual, section 5.2 of volume 1, has this statement that it says all applications for proposed projects within the special flood hazard area shall provide base flood elevations, so actual data of the elevations, and floodway data to establish floodplain limits and lowest floor elevations and cut fill quantities. So when people come before you, even if the graphic line of the floodplain is in a spot, what we do as engineers is we take that and look at the elevation data. And again, so the cross section that you see, we're looking at that 411 elevation data, and we're saying that's actually paramount. Even though the lines may extend further into the site, we recognize that the water rises by elevation, and the 411 is in our opinion, is the appropriate measure of where that floodway is. For part of the reasons that Roger indicated, that data of the floodway actually dates back precursor to the berm and everything that was constructed there. As I understand, I think is what you said. And maybe don't let me put words in your mouth if that's incorrect. But that's our position, is that the floodway ought to be defined by that data simply because it must be inside the floodplain. Another way to think of this is if our berm was longer than the 250, 300 feet that we have, if it was say thousands of feet, which that condition exists in Metro quite frequently, we would simply set the building back. Even if the floodplain line was encroachment, we would simply go, hey, the 411 actually stops at the berm. So all this floodplain that you see back here in our project, we're not even encroaching that, and staff would agree with that interpretation, and we would actually not even have to provide cut fill calculations if we were above that 411. And that's what we're saying, is we're above that 411 by a substantial margin. The building itself and none of the disturbance is subject to the floodway or floodplain as it's mapped.
I want to build on your discussion just now and Mr. Lindsley's, but I want to recognize Mr. Palco first.
I'm Tom Palco, Assistant Director of Metro Water. That's not the way you define a floodway. A floodway is not defined by an elevation. A floodway is, like Roger said, it's an encroachment thing as you go in, and that is an area that needs to carry the flow. Whether or not it's this far above or that far below the flood elevation has no bearing on how a floodway is established. When these maps are created, like Roger said, they go through a series of reviews through the Corps of Engineers, through FEMA, through FEMA's consultants, and we determine where that floodway is, and that's where it is. So if you disagree with the flood map, your first, before coming here, you can go to FEMA, you can send them modeling, you can attempt to move the floodway. But until you move the floodway through the FEMA process, the floodway is where it shows up on those maps. And so today you are here asking to build a building within the floodway.
Well, and I think my simple retort to that would be, is there any condition, I mean, you said it repeatedly there, the floodway is inside the floodplain. So is there any condition that you know of where the floodway is actually as the flowage of the stream outside of the floodplain? I don't know of any. I don't think by definition, the definition Roger's given, the floodway is a constriction of the floodplain such that it shows a rise of 1 foot. So again, we're being conservative in some ways of saying the floodway could be interpreted as a 411, realizing that it's actually likely inside of that, but we're willing to say, listen, just let's call it 411 for the sake of the discussion.
Yes, so I have a question that may tee up your response too, is what if you had a mountain in the floodway? Or what if you had Mud Island in Memphis in the floodway?
So there are provisions. I mean, there's a standard that defines how modeling is accomplished. And I posed the question to the Corps, who does all of our modeling across the state, and I said, describe for me how you would find a scenario where a floodway could be divided like that. And from the response I got from Barry Moran, who is our modeler, has been for 20 years probably, is that you've got to have a scenario whereby the floodway would split. There has to be a flow channel that will allow that floodway to split behind it. The floodway's wide. The floodway extends well beyond this little berm where this proposed project that goes halfway across their property. And the reason that it's spread like it is because the floodway is sensitive in this part of the city. The floodway can't shift to the other side of the river because there's a high berm on the other side of the river. Much more of a berm than what we're describing here. There's a natural bluff that probably extends 100 feet above the water elevation. As you come around Briley Parkway, you come off that hill and the bridge comes down to a much lower level. And so the bulk of the floodplain and the floodway is pushed to the area beyond where the top of the bank of the river is. It's twice as wide as what the river is wide. And,
that was leading me to my other question is, if we did a cross section from this berm to the other side of the river, do we know what the elevation is on the other side?
The other side of the river?
Yes, on the other side from the
probably
from the
511. It's just looking at profile lines a couple of days ago. I was looking at the other side of the river because we run into this from time to time. We ran into it on Pennington Bend when we started adjusting, when the floodway was adjusted, and it was halfway up on the parcels around Pennington Bend and Miami Avenue. We asked the Corps, is there a way to balance this floodway? And the answer is, there's a high bluff there as well. So all the floodway has to come back to the other side, the lower side. The insides of these bends typically have a lot more floodplain than the outsides of these bends where there's typically a higher bluff. So this is kind of a similar scenario. It's probably about 100 feet higher on the side opposite the river.
I think Ms. Jones pulled it up here, so it looks like it's
Looks like 480.
476, 480.
Yeah, 476.
And then while you have the contours pulled up on the other side, how does the stretch, is that the Briley Parkway Bridge and then north? What does the elevation do as it approaches the berm? Is that a lower area? So basically, the bottom of the screen, that as you approach Briley.
Yeah, I can touch on that. There is a low-lying area as you go on the other side of the access drive that comes in, and that's actually the means by which that area inundates during a flood event.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a backwater condition. This berm where the road is elevates above, as we discussed, above the floodplain, and so the other side inundates.
So I'm trying to build on Mr. Lindsay's comment with the feedback you got from FEMA related to, in a situation where there's a high elevation within a floodway, a split must occur in order for that area to be considered outside of the floodway. And I'm wondering if we look at the overall topography of the site, if we are achieving a split due to the nature of this berm and the elevation that it is above the 100-year.
Yeah, and the point that Barry made in his response to my question about splitting a floodway, he says the Cumberland floodway is very sensitive in this area where floodwaters must be conveyed in the overbanks because of the extent of the flow and the width of the floodplain on the side of the gun club. So the floodwaters must be conveyed in the overbanks to safely pass the 100-year flood and maintain floodway discharge criteria. Applications where a split floodway are appropriate are where or when there is a clearly defined flow conveyance, a separate stream, where floodwater can separate from the main river course for a significant distance and then return to the main river course downstream. This is not the case where the floodwaters clearly encompass the Cumberland River floodplain overflowing into its overbanks. FEMA mapping standards are that the floodway is drawn as a solid polygon in these situations. There are multiple sites along the Cheatham Reservoir where this is the case. Sounds like they may be considering a different approach to designing the site, but it would be very difficult to develop a split floodway due to floodplain conditions and getting approvals through Metro and FEMA. It's clearly not a split floodway condition.
So if I could summarize that, because I think Roger's spot on there, and I think what I hear him saying is that the reason that the mapped floodway is shown in the way it's shown is that this is not a split condition such that there's actually a separate channel that forms and goes around. This is a little bit of a backwater condition. And any backwater that comes in from the north side of this, I believe, is just a pipe system that conveys sort of what's inundated on this back out. So there's not a clear flowage where FEMA would look at defining that way. But I think it's important to recognize when he's talking about flowage over the overbank, that's not over the 411 elevation, right, by definition, because that's the limit to what the floodplain is mapped at now. So it's not as though the floodway is flowing over that berm to the other side. It's flowing around this berm. And I think what Roger has just indicated is that the way that FEMA would map that typically is by just saying, hey, this whole thing is blocked off. And so it's not it's just an impreciseness maybe in the model. It's the best that they can do. And you can imagine they're mapping miles and miles and miles of streams and rivers like this. And so to get into the technicality of a small bermed area like this that has created this backwater condition is exactly that. It's a little bit of a technicality. And so that's where we go back and say we feel it's appropriate to look at this through the lens of, I think, just what makes sense. Where is the actual floodway in this condition? It's certainly below the 100-year floodplain would be our position. And that's, again, we're not saying discount the maps. All of the things that Roger has pointed out are exactly true. It's just that it's not a relevant calculation in this context, similar to just when you see maps that are wildly different than the field conditions from an elevation data. We see that all the time. It's not that we're going against FEMA. It's we're saying we have actually a little bit more context and better information than you guys might have on this one small little section of river. Other point of,
I think it's probably pertinent that you said earlier was that you would be going against the FEMA map. That's something that happens routinely. That's what a LOMA effectively is, and LOMAs are common. That's a letter of modification, and that is where you go back and address these inconsistencies for specific locations. That's a very common occurrence.
To respond to that though, we don't have a LOMA here, and that is that a process that could happen outside of this sort of hearing?
There is a LOMA on part of this site on the north side, and we attempted to extend it and got hung up going through the process.
Okay.
I have a question or a point of clarification on that for this commission. So obviously we're looking at this appeal, but in order to evaluate the appeal, we're ultimately evaluating where is the floodplain. And is that appropriate for this commission to be deciding where the floodplain is based on the data that we have from FEMA without something else that is indicating that it's proving otherwise, a LOMA or something else?
I would just clarify the floodway.
Floodway.
We actually know that's why
floodway. Yes, thank you for clarifying that.
I believe you take the evidence as you have it. And I do think that a threshold issue is whether you believe it is or it is not in the floodway. And so you take what you have before you, you take what's been presented, you take what staff has presented to you, and you take the data that you can access you accessed before you came here today.
And I'll add to that, I think we're also to consider we're dealing with an existing condition. And that goes back to my question of, what if you had an existing condition of a mountain that existed in the floodplain, and you wanted to build on top of that mountain, but it was surrounded by floodplain? Would you be able to build on the mountain because the elevation is above the floodway and floodplain?
Yes, this is an existing condition, but based on what I'm hearing and based on what the data appears to show, Metro Water and FEMA consider this all to be within the floodplain at this very moment, from what I understand.
That's the way it's mapped and modeled.
And
the other thing that I want to make sure that when we talk about, as Andrew just talked about, this whole zone being, a berm that's higher than the floodplain, that water's not flowing across that. But there's water flowing through that overbank, and we don't know whether it's. We know that there's no way in and out. We know that there's no way in and out of this site because the water at 100-year flood elevation is probably about 5 to 7 feet deep on this road coming in. We know that the water on the road going out up here is maybe as much as 10 feet deep. So there's no way to get in and out of the site once you get not at 100-year flood, but short of 100-year flood. Already the roadways are becoming covered with water. So there is some flow that's coming through. Maybe it's coming under the bridge and, where the athletic fields are back here. But generally the flow, because there's got to be a wide enough conveyance, given that you can't, that your floodway doesn't go beyond the high berm that's on this side of the river.
I have a motion, and there can be more discussion if needed after the motion, if that's okay with the chairperson.
One more question to ask before the motion. Just what happens? Is there a stream on the north end of this property that the water recedes into, or does it go back into the river on the south side?
I don't believe there's a stream, but I believe when the excavation was done back in the 90s for the landfill, I believe there was a culvert release that is designed sort of to convey some water back into the creek. So this area that does get inundated can both come back out the south and then also can, I think, flow out through the north. But
okay.
Yeah.
You can see that if you pan north just a hair, because it's a culvert right there. So, it's that. And that ditch, that culvert is 25, 30 feet deep. Right. Right there.
And it's important to note, I know it looks like Rebecca's panning over the 2010 flood aerial. So certainly this area was highly inundated, as everything was, and likely, I don't know what the final elevation got to. I just know it was a little less than the existing clubhouse, which is 415.5, but certainly more than 411, which is more than 100 years.
What process or procedure was required for the existing structure when it was built?
Back in the 90s, so this is state-owned property. So I know that there was a lease agreement with the state, and you guys that have been around then may elaborate on that. But so they went through the state process to allow both the excavation, the lease, and then the structure was built. So I'm not sure in terms of.
So it didn't have to come before this committee to get an exemption to pull.
Correct. Yeah. It did not. Again, being part of the state. This time around, just incidentally, we do have to go back through the state building commission. They just requested that we play through the proper course of permitting, so that's what we're doing here. So.
Something that's relative to the question that you just asked, talking about when the original clubhouse was built, one of the things that was granted was we gave the city 470,000 cubic yards of material that is basically this floodway. We deepened the floodway so that they could move that material to the landfill. At the time, there were some commitments from the city to assist us in the future, but that's all kind of slid by the wayside. And
I don't think anybody has any concept what that is.
Yeah, and we're not asking for that, but it is certainly a point of consideration.
I think what we're looking at here is whether we need to, I'm going to make a motion to affirm the NWS's staff's determination that the proposed structure is in a floodway based off of the current Army Corps of Engineer and FEMA maps.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Okay. Seeing none.
Is there another motion?
Rescind your motion?
No, it just dies.
My
motion stands.
Where would this motion go? What would be the next
We then
step
go
if
to
it
the
was adopted?
exemption stage and to determine whether, if this is in a floodway, if they would meet the exemption that then would allow us to be here, or allow them to be here to ask for the variance.
Okay. Do we have a with that information, do we have a second? Okay. Seeing none, motion dies.
There's only one other counter to that, I would think, but, so if somebody else is going to make a motion. So if we're not affirming MWS's staff's determination this is in a floodway, the only other, I don't know if there is another way, it would be making the motion that it is not in a floodway. So if somebody would like to make that motion, since mine died.
I would also add that the variance request is requesting disturbance of the floodway to construct a building for public benefit.
Flowway buffer, I would say. We are not intending.
So, I mean, in a sense, we've been talking about whether it's in the floodway or not, but technically, with the way that the variance is written on the application, we've been talking about how it may or may not be within the floodway, but the request is the disturbance of the floodway. So,
Mr. Sandhu, I think we've approached that as an alternative argument. The lawyers in the room would be more familiar with that than maybe just some of the average folks walking down the street. But the idea is, while we have the preliminary question, we recognize that there's a possibility that vote won't go our client's way. And in the alternative to that, if it is determined that we are in the floodway, we ask the board to consider the relief from that stipulation regarding the floodway. So, as Ms. Simpson said earlier, we only get there if we get there, but if we do, that's our alternative request.
Yeah. So I think that helps to frame the next motion to carry this forward is that there should be a motion related to the variance request that asks for disturbance of the floodway, and that's what we need to rule on first in order for
if I could clarify that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think the staff, as I understand it, staff has written it in that their interpretation is that we are in the floodway. Therefore, that's how they've asked us to write the application. We are contending that and saying we believe we are actually not in the floodway as defined. So our intent would be, if we win the appeal, we would then be asking for a variance to the buffer disturbance of the floodway. But that's a separate conversation. So,
because if there is, as it's written, no new structure shall be constructed within the floodway, period. So if it's in the floodway, the only way it could be constructed is if it meets an exemption. So if we make that determination, then we get to the exemption. So that is, So ultimately, if we determine it's not in the floodway, the variance request, we can't ever make the determination that a new structure is going in the floodway. That's not within our purview.
Except for now we enter into the exemptions.
If we determine it's in a floodway, then we go into the exemptions and decide, does it fall within an exemption? If we say it does not fall within an exemption, we cannot hear it. If we say it does fall within an exemption, then we can hear it.
Thank you.
Still, does the precedent of the existing building go back and, there's a building there that obviously did not have an exemption from this committee, or didn't have a permit? Or,
When did you say that building was constructed?
I believe in the early to mid 90s.
Yeah, these regulations weren't in effect at the time, and so it would have been a completely different process.
I believe there was a grading permit for that, but I don't know that there was a variance.
Yeah, just a review of the historical aerial photos suggests that it was built sometime between 96 and 2000.
There's a 1993 grading permit. I'm not sure what that's for, honestly.
Yeah, that may be the case for the grading that Lillard mentioned, as far as the borrow may have been happening in the early 90s and the structure built after that.
Then it was enlarged in 2017 with the back, on the back of the building, a cover, I guess it's a covered eating area.
It's just a covering on a patio that had always been there.
Yeah.
But I will say the commission will need to make a ruling on this initial determination so they can at least continue through the process. So I've already made a motion to affirm the staff's determination it's in a floodway. My motion died. There's only one other option. But we can't, I don't think that there is a pathway where we don't make a determination here to allow them to continue on through whatever process they need to.
I think, for some further discussion, I think based on the information that we've been presented today, in the way that the floodplain's mapped, this bermed area falls within the floodway, falls within the floodway because there's not another route that the water gets out in a way that meets the criteria of FEMA or the Army Corps. And I think I'm having a hard time seeing a route that would go against that from the information that we've been presented to date. I think there's a lot of information to take into account to do that, but I think based on the information that's been presented to us today, it's very difficult for me to see how this does not fall in the floodway.
And that's where I go back to the elevations. So, you know, how can we have land that is, or a berm, or again, a mountain that is at an elevation above the floodplain and the floodway? And that's the piece that I'm struggling with in order to make that determination. So that's the piece. It's an existing condition. It's not new construction. And so that's where I need some more guidance on in order to maybe guide another motion.
The one other question I have for legal counsel is if the commission cannot, because we are tied on this vote, does the MWS's determination stand?
Yeah, continue deliberations, and let me just confirm that I have that.
Mm-hmm.
I see this personally as, again, they're coming before us. There has been a determination made by Metro Water, MWS's staff, regarding this isn't a floodway based on the maps. They are here and would need to provide us evidence and show that it is not within that. I have heard other commissioners say that they don't have that, which means, to me, it indicates, and obviously this is my perception as the commissioner sitting listening to the deliberation, which is why I made my motion, is that I don't think I have enough to say that the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA, that their maps are not accurate. And it sounds like there was a LOMA process at one point, but it has not gone through. I think it'd be, obviously, if we had a LOMA, we probably wouldn't even be here because it would already have been determined as an exception from that map. But since we're still deliberating, those are just my thoughts.
Can we pull up the cross section, Ms. Dawn? Sorry to ask you to switch screens. And this is where I need help. So they've got an average river elevation, but we don't necessarily consider that. So base flood elevation. What is the base flood elevation here? Is it that 4?
That's a 411.
411.
That's the red
right?
line is depicting that elevation on the chart. The graph there.
Did I hear Mr. Lindsay say that we anticipate, the maps are not out yet for the new data, but we anticipate that rising by 2.18 feet?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if the, just trying to understand a little bit of how the regulations are applied, if the facility is built and you had to insure the facility, would they look at FEMA maps and say it's in the floodway?
I could possibly address that. So if they were looking at it from a FEMA insurance perspective, and Roger, certainly you deal with this all the time, they could get an elevation certificate on the structure, which would show that it's over 4 feet. And then that would go to the insurance, and I suppose they would look at that as a exception, depending on the structure. I think typically Metro requires 4 feet for any commercial retail establishment above the floodplain. And
no, it's 4 feet for a residential property.
4 feet for residential.
1 foot, 1 foot for a non-residential structure. So that's the way our ordinance is set up, with a higher standard. It is, in fact, we know pretty conclusively that it's going to rise by 2 feet here, but that's not on a new map. It's not been adopted, but it's going to happen. And I can assure you that the that the $10 billion worth of improvements on the east bank of the Cumberland River downtown and the Oracle campus in River North, they're all conforming to the fact that their base flood elevation is going to rise by as much as 3 feet. It is regularly discussed. It is known and discussed by the mayor's office, who said it's crazy. We're not going to build $10 billion worth of new stuff on the east bank of the river, knowing that the new model, which is already defined enough to know what those rises are, and it's kind of a routine position we take. It's like when we have preliminary maps that are already prepared by FEMA but not yet adopted by the city council, we enforce to those preliminary maps as long as they're more conservative. If they're going to rise, if the base flood elevation is going to rise, we go we'd be doing you a disservice to allow you to proceed with a map that we know is going to be superseded shortly by a rise of 2 feet in your base flood elevation. So it's a fairly routine process that we go through. We will, by the end of this year, have a set of maps from FEMA, that will show these rises through from Old Hickory Lake all the way to the spillway of Cheatham Dam. Now, they won't be reviewed by FEMA at that point. They won't exist as preliminary maps, but they're pretty rock solid because the modeling that's being done for us by the Nashville District Corps of Engineers is pretty spot on stuff.
So
Go ahead.
Well, once that 2.18 feet rise happens, will that push the base flood elevation above your current road?
The current road is about 413, so we'd probably push it very close to where the road is if it's at 411 now, but the structure itself would be probably still 2.5 feet above that new floodplain, if that's where the elevation goes. So which would comply. Again, for Roger, commercial and non-residential is required to be a foot.
And back to my question just a minute ago. So I understand the 1 foot above and 4 foot above, but does that apply to structures within the floodway or structures within the floodplain?
Well, the floodway is in the floodplain. It's a standard that's written for construction in the floodplain. And then you're and this ordinance, the 1564.170 is part of the code. So it's not part of the regulation. The regulation addresses the whole issue of freeboard for residential or freeboard for non-residential structures, those kinds of things. But typically, it's this code that we consider not to be something that this commission can vote to override because it was passed by the city council.
I understand it's a bit of an odd question because you wouldn't usually have a structure in the floodway, so
right.
It's a little bit of a unique question to ask.
Lou and I need to take a quick bathroom break. Can we take a pause and come back? I'm sorry. Can we pause the session? Okay. All right. Sorry. I think we're going to be going on for a few more minutes, so we'll be right back. Okay. and state of our bodies as we deliberate. So, okay, calling the meeting back to order. Folks, I'm going to call the meeting back to order, if you don't mind. Thanks. Okay. All right, calling the meeting back to order. So we're kind of bringing it back together. We've got deliberation on the motion, or excuse me, as the variance request. We had a motion on the variance request as written.
On the appeal.
On the appeal, and that failed, and now we're in deliberation about still whether or not this section of the property is within the floodway or floodplain.
I want to clarify why I asked my question exactly, because, if for some reason you went through the Clomer process and removed that berm from the floodway, if FEMA allowed that, with the new modeling, if it pushes it over top of the berm, you're going to be back in the floodway by FEMA standards. So I think you're...
Yeah, sorry, and I think we sort of answered, and staff's initial recommendation was to discuss this with FEMA and to look at doing the Clomer, because that would make it clean from their perspective. And I think Roger sort of alluded to this in some of his discussion. There's not 100% confidence that FEMA would necessarily look at the model in the same way that we're interpreting it from the data, simply because the precision that's necessary to look at that small segment, they would want to see it truly be a truly defined stream in order to actually start mapping the floodway. So we're not 100% sure that could even be done properly. And when we talked to a floodplain modeling expert, which we did, we spent a couple months really trying to digest that. The response was, A, you're going to spend probably $50,000 of money, and B, not 100% sure what the FEMA models are going to indicate or what they're going to respond with. And again, it's not that we're not willing to do that because we won't like the answer. It's that we don't know if it's even something that's relevant given, and I think we've said it many times, the floodway is inside the floodplain. That is a non-disputable fact that nobody here is contending. The floodway is inside the floodplain. The floodplain is, by Metro's standard practice and their own ordinance, defined by elevation at 411. And so we're saying we actually have the knowledge and the data that maybe we feel like can sort of add context to the FEMA maps. Not that it supersedes them, but it adds context in the same way we would do it when we have maps that we know don't align from a graphic representation of the floodplain. We know those don't align with the data that we see. We go by the data because we know that survey data is more relevant. And that's really what we're trying to say here, is that we feel like the survey data of knowing that the floodway is inside that floodplain 411 line, it's inside, it's not outside. We feel like that gives us the ability to make that interpretation without going through the process with FEMA, spending a lot of money where we don't 100% know how their model would sort of adjudicate that. Go ahead.
It shows to be in the floodplain on the FEMA maps. There's no way to change the FEMA maps without a FEMA action. So we can't just all sit around and say, oh, okay, Andrew's got some better surveying data, so let's just declare this berm to be out of the floodplain. That won't happen. It's not allowable by FEMA's processes, and it's not something we've done in the past. It's the only way to change a FEMA map is through a letter of map amendment, letter of map change, something to that effect.
Yes, and maybe I'm poorly stating that, but I'm suggesting that we do allow development that is inside the floodplain on a routine basis, with the criteria being that you balance the cut and fill in that floodplain, and you do such by elevation data. So that's the point I'm making, is that we look at things through the lens of the actual raw data for survey when we talk about interpreting the floodplain, and we're simply trying to apply that same logic to how we interpret the floodway in this context. So I probably roughly stated that, but I was just making that point that we use the data on a regular basis, and we're just asking to do that.
What do you think that you would need to see to make a determination? Like, why are you stuck? What do you think that you need to make that determination? Have they provided you what you think you need? Is there something else that can be provided? Is this something that needs to be deferred so you can get something else? Because if you don't feel like you can make the determination because you don't have something, then identify what you don't have, and let's make a motion to defer it and have them come back with their supporting evidence if maybe that's what you need, or ask for more info for staff, ask for someone from FEMA to show up. Maybe FEMA could come here and describe, this process, could give their expert opinion on why or why not they think that this should be included. But right now, what do you need? How can we get there?
Well, I think you're hearing a lot of deliberation because we respect the staff's work on this, and we've got a recommendation from them, and we feel like there's some, and we also understand the applicant side, and so we're trying to provide a balance between the two, just to be fair to both parties and provide due process here. So there's some very rooted facts and opinions on how this should be handled on both ends. So yeah, it's certainly a unique case that has a two-part process within the motion, so it's being handled carefully by this commission, and I hope that you appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, and I respect that. I'm just saying, I'm just trying to help you. I'm trying to help you figure out what if you don't need anything, then I'm sorry, I'm out of turn. But if you do, if you're thinking in your mind, wow, I'd really like to see this, or I'd really like to hear from this person to feel comfortable making this vote because she made the vote and it failed. Yeah. I'm just trying to encourage you to speak that so that we know sort of, and they know, and staff knows, is there some assistance that we can give you? Of course, I want you guys to be as thorough, to make the best record you can, involve your thoughts. Of course, that's the goal, and I appreciate that. But also, I want to know, can we help?
Yeah. Well, so back to my very first question of what we are actually being asked to do, I think Roger just clarified to me, and I think he's already said it, but it kind of just re-clarified it for me. What we are being asked in essence to do is determine where is the floodway, and right now we know where the floodway is mapped, and FEMA has determined that, and unless there's something that is being presented today that says that is not where it's mapped, I don't think there's a position in my mind that says we can say that it's not. So the discussion since the motion has clarified, I think, my understanding of the current situation.
The piece that I struggle with that piece is the elevations, right? So how can we resolve? I guess this is a question for staff: is how can you help me resolve it in my mind that the elevations do not provide us with a situation that this part of that property is above the floodway?
The other thing that concerns me is, though, what precedent does it set if you're saying that FEMA determines it, and without some additional response from FEMA or information from them explaining it, then we are looking at the elevation of all these different potential scenarios and saying it does fall outside of it.
Can I make a suggestion, and I know Steve has something, but we would be open to a deferral if that became to it because there was some more discussion needed. I think we'd also be open to a conversation about the second point we're making. And again, if the commission looks at the evidence and says, actually, even if we say it's floodway, we do think this should be granted exception based on the language of the exceptions. If there's a consideration made there, and if the answer is yes, then obviously we'd win the appeal on that ground. So we would be open to that conversation. If the answer is no, then we may want to set the table and say we actually like to go back and have a more definitive answer on this. But just to throw that out there, that could be.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Tabling that.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Mishu.
Thank you, Commissioner. Steve Mishu, Special Projects Manager for Metro Water. I'm going to try to stay as Switzerland as I can and just try to give you guys as much guidance as I can on it. I think Metro Water staff is suggesting that we have FEMA maps, we have data, and we say the entire thing from here to here, including the mound that you reference, is all in the floodway. The applicant has made a mention that he would not like to do the LOMA, but that is the traditional path for, hey, if there's a mistake or an error or something to that nature, there is a path to go forward through the FEMA process in order to get that resolved. I think the applicant's suggesting that it could be time consuming, and it may not give them the results that they want. But there is a path forward into looking at the maps and changing the maps. If they do follow that process and it does work in their benefit to change the maps, you may get this little island in the middle of the floodway that is not a floodway, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not in the buffer, which means you're still back at the committee again. But at least that gets the dilemma of, is it in the floodway or not, which obviously staff doesn't say it's a dilemma because the floodway is from here to here and there's just no image that shows otherwise. But Commissioner Simpson also made a point of saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and say it's a floodway. Let's make a motion and move forward with that. I don't know necessarily that means that the commission members are then saying we wish to deny it. I think what that happens is you're saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and assume staff is right and label it as a floodway. And then we will go to the second piece of discussing the merits of whether this should fall within the exemption or not. And I'm looking at Tara and Tom as professionals to see if they're going to throw any tomatoes at me to see if I said anything wrong. But I think that is hopefully some precious background that will help you guys make a decision on how to move forward one way or the other way. And I don't see them throwing tomatoes at me either, so I don't know if they're, other than maybe that they don't like my definition of the floodway, which is not my definition, but my interpretation of it. So I hope that helps. And I can try to clarify or add or subtract if you guys so choose.
I will tell you, I listened to a commissioner and I would like to renew my initial motion to affirm the MWS staff's determination that the proposed structure is in a floodway based off of the current Army Corps and FEMA maps.
Great. We have a motion. Do we have a second? It's been properly seconded by Mr. Oliver. Is there any discussion? Okay. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. That motion carries.
At this point, now we get to go to the second part, which we have determined that it falls under 1564-170A. So therefore, for them to come before us, it would have to fall under subsection B in one of the exemptions. The exemption that I believe they're citing is F, which talks about athletic fields used for recreational purposes, including facilities associated with the recreational athletic fields, such as dugouts, bleachers, concession stands, storage buildings, and other similar structures or facilities. What I heard the argument earlier is that they are looking at this as an other similar structure or facility. Did I summarize that argument?
Very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We had a case not too long ago that was a private residential case that used this provision as an exemption. And I know that there was some, we had a lot of dialogue with legal, and I think that there was some action after that case was heard, or clarification at least that was provided back to the commissioners maybe.
Well, there was somewhat of a change to 1564-170F from what either Andrew or Lillard read at the beginning. It just changed the language slightly, so I can read the updated language, which was
Actually,
passed.
could we put that on the screen? I think it would be really helpful. I am looking at what was on the Nashville Gov site, so if that's not accurate, I may have been.
Yeah, it takes some time for Municode to be updated. I can.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
The Municode is not correct, Rebecca. So
I can send you the language, Rebecca.
send me the language.
Because I feel like this is an interpretation question. So ultimately, they're coming before us to interpret it. If it wasn't that, they probably would have to file a declaratory judgment action. And so we are interpreting whether they fall within this exemption. So the exact language is really important to make that interpretation.
I'll read the language too.
Can you, before you read it, can you please just clarify where this is and where it can be found?
Yes, there will be in the Muni Code eventually. I don't know how long the process between.
Right, but where?
It's usually like an hour delay, but do you have the bill number you can read,
Yes.
Logan, that altered the language slightly?
Yes, this is BL 2024-294. It was, final action was passed on April 16th, 2024 by the Metropolitan Council. And it says, athletic fields used for recreational purposes, including facilities associated with the recreational athletic fields, such as dugouts, bleachers, concession stands, storage buildings, and other similar structures or facilities. For the purposes of this section, athletic fields means pervious, natural land used for recreational purposes by members of the general public on land or on public land or at educational facilities such as soccer fields, football fields, or baseball diamonds. Athletic field does not mean an athletic facility composed of impervious material such as tennis courts, basketball courts, or fields with artificial or synthetic grass.
So just to clarify, Logan, the section above that, the very first part, that all stayed the same with the bill as the current reg. So and I think that's the piece that we'd be appealing to.
I will say what I had not seen before was the definition of athletic field, which appears to be new compared to, I think, what was posted online. So this, for some of us, is the first time we're seeing it. As we were prepping for this case, I didn't have access, or maybe I could have located it, but I was looking at the old code. Rebecca, can you scroll down just a little bit?
And I would think that, not knowing the council's intent, but I read that as that they were looking at things like tennis courts and things that were impervious, and they wanted to exclude that from those determinations, I suppose.
Yeah, I think to clarify exactly what was the thought, but it specifies that it has to be on public land. That was a big discussion in the previous case.
I mean, I think that as you sit, you probably have a lot more institutional knowledge about this amendment because it was directly a result of the deliberations and the case that was brought before you. So I think you have a lot of history and background, and I believe this was the district council member's attempt to try to make that cleaner so that if you have a similar case come before you, you know what to look for. In this particular instance, I think they've identified other similar structures or facilities, which to me is a buffer for the preceding part of that sentence.
I agree. I think we have to make a determination. Do we believe this qualifies as an athletic field? If we do not, then you don't even get to the determination whether it is an other similar structure or facility, because it has to be an athletic field for that to even apply. So to me, it looks like there's a couple of elements to this on the determination of an athletic field. So it has to be pervious, naturally, and used for recreational purposes by the members of the general public. So what we're looking at for this determination is not the building itself. It is the recreational field that would be adjacent to it. So we may have some questions associated with that to make a determination whether it would qualify as an athletic field. So I'm going to have some questions. I'm just going to walk through some of these elements. I have actually been to the Nashville Gun Club, if I'm recalling correctly how it's set up. Can you explain how the shooting lanes are set up, whether it is a pervious versus an impervious sort of?
So the site as it exists today is approximately 254 acres. Everything on the site is pervious, with the exception of the drive aisle all around the facility. The rest of the facility is all pervious. It's all natural grass. Much of the area is maintained as tall grass, so it's not only pervious, it is almost a detention pond. The whole site's almost a detention pond. So yes, it is all pervious.
Did any of the commissioners have additional questions relating to that sort of element of the definition of athletic field.
If we're willing to allow the definition of concessions and buildings and storage and other purposes to facilitate the structure, if we're all willing to interpret it in that way.
Yeah, I don't have any objection to this being the sport.
No, I have a question.
On
So I don't even think we get to the concessions and all of that. You all have briefly discussed about the public nature of this land. I know that it's owned by Metro, or it is publicly owned, but it's being leased, correct? Tell me a little bit about public access. I think you said it is fully open to the public.
Fully open. There's no membership required. The only benefit of membership is for regular users. It provides a discount on the services.
So if somebody were to go out and reserve a shooting lane,
you don't reserve it. It's first come.
It's first come. Okay, that answers.
Completely open to the public. It's not gated unless it's closed from the time.
Gated, but it's closed. When it's closed, it's gated.
Okay.
But open, open to the public. So, I think my interpretation of that is certainly it's an athletic complex field. It not as clean as maybe like a baseball diamond or something, but even in those complexes, you can imagine there's some supporting impervious areas. Willard mentioned drive aisles and small access huts and things of that nature. So I think in that context, it would be very similar like a golf course or anything else like that.
And I believe that we even had Miss Ashley Tone come up and talk about some of the educational aspects, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Is that, or that may have been
correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that is also a consideration.
SCTP is the Scholastic Clay Target Program, and basically it supports use from middle school through college, and that is the sanctioning group for that age group nationally. And
I feel comfortable based off of looking at this that this would qualify as an athletic field is the way that I would read the new, but I want to make sure.
I think the key for me too to add on to that is that because you can have a private operation of a public ground, but I think for me that in fact it's a nonprofit functions just like a lot of the other facilities that function on public ground. So I do think that's a key component. Just as we look back at meetings and decisions in the future, that's a key component that I think qualifies it for that.
To further that point, I think the intent, if I'm reading this correctly, and I'd like Ms. Ladd to verify that, is that the clarification was related to impervious material on the last section. The tennis courts, basketball courts are synthetic surfaces. I think in this case, considering the size of the site of over 200 acres and the amount of impervious components that are related to the sport is probably 1% or less of the entire campus. So I think we can have certainty behind understanding the intent behind this amended bill related to that concept.
There's also a distinction between public and private that was placed in there as well, just to say, for example, for lack of grabbing anything else, like a kid playing flag football in their private backyard would not qualify as an athletic facility, even if you invite other children. So, not to use that as an example, but for this, there's a clear message from the council lady that she believed that it should be public or open to the public.
Yeah, and in this case, it's on state-owned land and it's open to the public. Would that satisfy that?
Yeah, it says members, recreational purposes by members of the general public on public land. And while this is leased, I believe it's still public land under, if you look at our, tax assessor real property map. And so it is open to the general public and there is not a fee to use the specific shooting. So that is my initial thought. I wanted to go through that analysis. I think it's important to go through the analysis because we have to, but this is also new, so we're kind of working through it as we sit here. So sorry if it's not as elegant, But does the commission have any other questions about whether it would qualify as an athletic field? Because if we feel like it does, then we're going to, I think what their argument is that this is an other similar structure facility that would be used as a part of the athletic field.
Yeah, I think we're there, and at least for me.
Okay. So let's talk about.
I want to be sure I honored Mr. Lindsley.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Something. Go ahead, Mr. Lindsay. Sorry, I want to recognize you.
I was just going to say that we were part of the initial discussions with council members when this first came through that created this item F, if you will. And so, Rebecca, could we put up all of this obviously occurred post 2010 flood, and as this ordinance came together and began to be amended and additional pieces and parts added to it, Mr. Jameson was very familiar with some of the discussions that took place with respect to intent and things like that. The first project, and the only one that I'm really aware of at this point, there are some sport fields, some soccer fields around the city that are in floodways. The one off of out in Bellevue.
Cooley Davis Road.
Cooley Davis Road, thank you. Most of those soccer fields are in floodways. There's a building in the floodway of that property, but that building predates the regulation and that prohibited any construction. So, but this is the soccer fields along Antioch Pike. Just after Mill Creek crosses under the interstate. We were approached by a local, I think he was a contractor, and he said, there's a bunch of abandoned Little League ballparks over here. They haven't been used in years. They're growing up. Can we take those abandoned Little League parks and convert those into an active soccer facility for the neighborhood kids? A lot of kids in the neighborhood were big soccer fans, and so this was the first. And now across the street is a much larger soccer complex. It's a part of a more mature soccer program that even has an indoor soccer facility. But this was the extent of it. We said, well, what could it hurt to convert Little League baseball fields into some soccer fields? But if you're going to use these on a regular basis, and they'll be used on weekends, and there'll be hundreds of kids on this site, you got to have a place for them to go to the bathroom, and you probably need a snack bar. And so that's what added those. And there may be some grandstands for seating for those that come to watch their kids play. And so that's what came to define what was included in athletic fields. And today, this is a modern day, less than a year old aerial photograph. And so what was ultimately built here was a little storage building, which is on the far left. And there's 3 porta potties next to it. So I assume they never built restroom facilities. And then the next building up, just shortly, that's probably a concession stand. So that's what was built on this site in the floodway. The floodway completely covers this entire site all the way up to Antioch Pike. So that's what led us to this point. And I don't know, you want to talk about the intent from a council perspective?
My name is Mike Jameson. I work at Metro Water Services in the Stormwater Division. From 2003 to 2011, I had the honor and pleasure of serving on the Metro Council, and I co-sponsored the legislation that became 1564-170, so I can speak to the original intent. After serving on the council, I then served as the Metro Council Director and either drafted or advised council members on the construction of subsequent legislation that tweaked this legislation. Very brief historical review, I know you're already familiar with, but after the 2010 flood, there was an extreme reaction from the community and the council members That's what created subsection A, which wholly prohibited any new construction whatsoever. Shortly after that, it was recognized that some concessions had to be made. Bridge footings were an obvious requirement, but the council did come up with 5 exemptions or allowances under subsection A, which became subsection B. In those discussions, that was when the request for athletic facilities was first proposed by the councilman from Bellevue. That was soundly rejected in 2011, early 2011. The bill was reintroduced with assurances from the sponsor that these would be publicly accessible and that the ancillary facilities were those that just immediately were associated with the use of the field. You'll notice that the exemption today is not for athletic facilities, it's simply for athletic fields. This is not a field. What is being proposed to you is the ancillary structure that would go with the field. There is no example, no demonstration of a separate structure that would wholly house the users. The exceptions are dugouts and bleachers and storage facilities and concession stands. If this were to qualify as an athletic facility that is associated with an athletic field that is not before you, imagine what is going to come to you next. After that legislation passed, it was then modified by Councilman then Freddie O'Connell, whose work later on you may be familiar with, which expressly required that each of these facilities go on to comply with the remaining stormwater management manual requirements, including the absence of any adverse impact. So from the outset and through today, it has always been recognized that you are talking about publicly accessible, pervious fields that were accessible to the public, and that the ancillary structures were not wholly separate buildings that would wholly house the public using those fields. These were temporary uses such as concession stands and so forth, not the sort of exemption that's being argued today.
Appreciate that, Mr. Jamison. Thank you for being here today, and Mr. Lindsay.
And I think, too, that just, not that I have just a vendetta against this, but my early conversations with Mr. Teasley, when he showed me a $5 million facility to be built on the bank of the river, I guess my reaction was one of stunned disbelief, that we've gone from providing a couple of potties and a concession stand to a $5 million entertainment venue, essentially, that has pro shops and classrooms and food prep areas and so forth. That's how we reacted initially. So I just say that. So.
And I'll just respond. So I think I really appreciate the context that Mr. Jamison's bringing to this. So we understand this is unique. We fully acknowledge this is unique. This is not like anything that's been done in Metro. This is the only facility in Metro that does this type of operation. So the site's unique. The facility itself is unique. So we'll stand up and agree this is unique. The likelihood that you would see anything similar to this, asking for something similar, is very low, in our opinion. And so I would call your attention to one of the plans in the packet. If you keep going, Rebecca, or maybe go back. Again, these are renderings that were done. But if you go back, the floor plan. So if you go to this floor plan, and I covered this in my comments, over 6,000 feet, almost half of this building is an open air pavilion there you see on the left.
Can you please speak to that? Because the renderings don't really appear like that. So I'd really like you to talk through what is the open air and how is it open air?
Those are windows on each side, those large roll up, right? So this is essentially just a covered open air pavilion, right? On the left. And you see these are basically tables that are outlined with the stage. And so they have large events, they have ceremonies and awards. And so essentially it's in some ways very similar to like a large pavilion that you see on some of these facilities. And again, we would look at that as a similar structure in terms of its function and support of the
similar structure to to what necessarily when you say?
I would say in support of the athletic activities and that's how we read the legislation that talks about buildings that are facilities that are associated with recreational athletic fields. And so the rest of the usage, if you go through that floor plan, they're all essentially support functions for that gathering space, that pavilion space. Obviously, there's storage, which is a listed use that's allowable. There's concessions, so there's obviously some food and some sort of prep areas. You know, pro shop is a kind of a loose term, but there's obviously a place that's needed that you have transactions for the clay targets. People pay for the targets that they use. They may rent equipment for ears and eyes, and so that's. Pro shop is probably, you know, maybe some of your things, golf course, and there's selling T-shirts and all that. That's really the function space there for just the check-in and rentals and that sort of thing. So, again, everything you see there is what we would consider as supporting the athletic facilities. Is it unique? Yes. Is it like anything you've seen in Metro? No. We acknowledge that, and so I think we acknowledge that. Second floor is the next slide over. Basically, it's just gathering space. I think is what we've identified that as. Sort of overlooks again that open air pavilion is open to below, and so that's just additional assembly space if they have large events.
There's only second floor mezzanine on the right hand portion. The left hand portion is all open.
Yep.
It's only one level. The right hand is just a mezzanine. Something that is really apparent, if you look at the adjacent site to this, there's buildings all over it. And it's in the floodway.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that is not something that's before us today, and that's not something that we would consider as a part of this.
We always like to stay within the application, the bounds. So going back to the uses, I want to honor Mr. Jameson's and Mr. Lindsley's comments here, but I see that in this facility there's restrooms, there's concessions. I didn't see a kitchen, but and then there's shelter.
Yeah, there would not be a kitchen per se. It's more of a food preparation. If they have caters delivered that they have to distribute, so there'd be a preparation area.
So similar to the motion we made previously, where we made a motion that acknowledged the FEMA map that was before us and whether or not it covered this area or did not, the commission voted in favor that that's what the FEMA map showed. And so in this case, what we have before us is legislation that identifies acceptable uses within the floodway related to recreational activities that has some room for interpretation, but mostly related to how it supports that recreational activity. And there are no limitations to it from what I saw related to size or scale or any of those types of components. So I from the way I view this, it's in a similar light as the way I viewed Ms. Simpson's previous motion of what's before us. But I'm happy to. I'd love to hear from the commissioners.
Well, I mean, I am reading this, and I'm reading the old version, but I think that the top half that we're looking at now has stayed the same. Is that correct? And I have struggled with this one a bit. I've read it a lot of times. This one is very, I think, different than the initial intent of the legislation. I think, though, that it can this falls, in my mind, within an athletic field based off of my understanding. And now we have new guidance as to what an athletic field would qualify for. Where I struggle a bit, because it says including facilities associated with the recreational athletic fields, and then it gives examples as to what it is talking about there, such as dugouts, bleachers, concession stands, storage buildings, and other similar structures or facilities. So when I'm looking at other similar structures and facilities, I am looking at those previous examples and the way that is being defined. I may think of things a little bit differently because I'm an attorney and used to do appellate practice, and so I start breaking things down a bit. But that's where I've struggled a bit. This is a similar facility. I don't see it as a dugout. It's not bleachers per se. We have the concession stands, and it does sound like there is concessions of some sort, or it's just catering coming in?
Yeah, small concessions. I imagine you may have a drink locker or something. People could get water or something. And then you may have some catering functions if they do larger events.
And then there's storage buildings. But when I look at this in totality, it seems that those are just very small ancillary uses compared to, I think, what the big goal is and the purpose of this building, which to me, it looks like more of like a meeting area, an area where there could be events. The events may be associated with the actual recreational use. They may not. So that's where maybe having some additional context would be helpful.
Ms. Simpson, if I may, and I think I failed to introduce myself earlier. I'm John Michael from Thompson Britton Law Firm. I spent a quick moment looking at the new second and third sentence to this, the bill number 294 that Mr. Bowman showed us. But looking back to this, one of the things that I think is key in terms of reading and therefore interpreting the ordinance is, of course, the non-limiting such as. We're giving examples there, not a laundry list that is specific or the grocery list that my wife sends me with. That is specific. I assure you, Mrs. Michael doesn't play with that.
Yep.
But in this instance, with our such as's, dugouts are waiting areas for people participating in the athletic endeavor. That's what's shown with our facility, I believe. Bleachers are places for spectators to sit and observe or congregate. That's part of what we're showing with our facility. Concession stands mirror whether it's delivering snacks, setting up food prep, having cold drinks on hot days, hot coffee on cold days. That's what we're doing with our facility. And then storage buildings, of course, for whatever equipment, grass cutting, weed eating, whatever else, other equipment stored and locked. That's what we're providing with this structure. We are using all of those concepts, though not by those names, admittedly, and putting it in one structure. And that's where I think we fit in with those concepts, despite the fact that we're slightly different from the examples, non-limiting, but examples enumerated in the ordinance. Additionally, we have to point back, and I jotted the note to myself so I wouldn't forget it in case it came up. Big is not a defined problem under the ordinance. Expensive is not a defined problem under the ordinance. Different from the original contemplated athletic fields is clearly not a problem under the ordinance. And the fact that it is unique, both the use and the type of structure in this instance, is not a problem under the ordinance. As recently as this year, presumably within the last quarter, because as Ms. Ladd noted, it's just a matter with the online, it's only updated quarterly by our Metro's partner, Municode, to have had a bite at the ordinance so recently and not said things like, it can't be a big structure, limit on percentage of pervious area, et cetera, et cetera. We have the law that we have. And for the reasons that I just outlined in terms of interpreting those examples that were given, I think we fit in with all of those things, but in a different way.
Let me ask this. Would it be your position, because the way that I read this, other similar structures or facilities, that is referring to those things listed after such as?
I believe so.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we were speaking the same language there. But no, I appreciate your perspective and advocacy as it relates to those terms.
I just got a notice from Logan that we've got about 15 minutes before we need to be out of this room. There's another meeting. So I think we're working closely towards a motion. This commission has always held in favor projects that had a public benefit and how we view the variance that they're requesting. In this case, it's more of an interpretation of the legislation. And
I do want to say one other thing. Even if we get past that, they also have to show that there's no adverse impact. So there's one more step, as an FYI, as it relates to then making that determination, which I saw their package. They're claiming there's no adverse impact. So I wanted to bring that up as well, because I know that we're short on time.
Good one. Thank you for bringing that up. So I think that's where we're headed in the next step is a motion related to whether this qualifies, right, of a recreational structure. So for the sake of time, I want to...
I think I appreciate all the discussion that's been had so far. I think the intent is relatively clear of the ordinance. And while those uses are within this facility, and we would support nothing more than to follow the ordinance and to be able to operate the facility as you desire, I think the challenge is we're looking at a 2-story structure that we're saying, yes, people can sit in, yes, people can use the restroom in, yes, we can do that, this and that. It would be, my concern is the precedent it sets that someone else comes in here and says, I'm going to build a restroom, I'm going to put these things in, I'm going to do an open air pavilion that then I'm going to rent out and use for additional training facilities, and it still falls under all these uses, and you've approved one before. I think it's really hard to look at this structure and say that it meets the intent of this ordinance as it is right now. I think there's probably a way to, given the way that we've looked at the facility and the use in the athletic fields, to do that. It's really hard to say that this structure does that.
I will tell you when I think that there is ambiguity, and I appreciate your counsel's argument, but I do believe there is some ambiguity. And when I see ambiguity, I always go back and look at legislative intent, which is why I think that that was somewhat helpful hearing that background. And I know that we're saying it's like a dugout, which other similar structures or facilities. So I get the argument that we're being made, but I think I'm struggling a little bit with some of the same aspects that my fellow commissioner.
So something I just heard you say that was not really right is that this is a 2-story building. It's not, as defined by the building code. This is a 1-story pre-engineered metal building with a mezzanine.
I think I saw an elevator.
Yeah.
Is there an elevator?
That's it.
So,
It's almost a pole barn.
but let me
But
just
it is very architectural.
let me piggyback on what council was saying, what John was saying a minute ago. So, I think the question back to the commission would be, if the reason is to deny the appeal because of the size or the cost or the whatever of the structure, what could we possibly come back and give you? Because there isn't a enumerated threshold of size, cost, scope. You understand? So you create a very, very tough burden for somebody coming in for an appeal when they've met the no adverse impact clause and when their structure has the defined uses that we have. All we have is what we have before us. And so I would just push that back to you guys and say you haven't left any room because there is not a defined minimum or maximum threshold that we're targeting. So again, we have the use, which we think we comply with. We have the no adverse impact, which we are saying we will comply with. And I would put those before you as items that are worthy of consideration.
But I believe, and Ms. Ladd can confirm this, but I believe that's the reason that you come before the commission, because the intent of that ordinance is to allow things like appropriate uses, athletic fields, permeable recreation facilities for the public good to exist. And for those to exist, you need some aspect of support structure. It doesn't matter to me how much it costs or what those certain aspects are, but the intent is to allow those to continue because it's been deemed a good use for that sort of land. The structures that are outlined in there are very much supportive uses, and you could say have a specific size and scale that are typically associated with them. Again, it goes back to the intent of the ordinance. It does not, in my interpretation and reading of the ordinance, this falls outside of that.
Mr. Chair, could I
Yes, please, Mr. Jameson.
make a request or suggestion? I completely understand there's an exhaustion level when drafting legislation about giving examples, what would qualify and what wouldn't. You know you're not going to think of everything, and so when you end the sentence with similar structures and facilities, you could go on for pages. And I completely hear you that you've not been given specific guidance as to what would be allowed. What I would ask you to contemplate in the weeks to come is think of the other side of that argument. And what limitations could you guarantee? If this were to be approved and a gentleman came forward and said, I'm going to build a Burger King here, and it serves this facility, it's just got food prep and a mezzanine, but it's a Burger King, why would that be prohibited? So I understand
Sure.
the lack of direction, but I think what comes with that in a healthy discussion is what limitations could you guarantee?
Yeah, and that's a very good question and point, and we probably didn't do a great job of framing this, but part of the public comment and the intent for that was to demonstrate the true need for a facility of this size and scope, for the amount of volume and the amount of folks, and Lily read a lot of content there you have it in front of you, the number of events, the number of visitors that they have. This is unique. So I think the way to respond to that would be, is the request at hand commensurate with the use that is needed out here? And we would say yes. So and to John's point a minute ago, this is simply a coalescing of multiple structures that on their own would likely be allowed on a facility this large and of this scale. We're simply aggregating those, putting them in one structure that is the gathering place and the hub, also happens to serve as restrooms, concessions, and storage for the site. But, that's why I say there's not a governing principle that says, well, you can only go to 4,000 square foot building. Okay, if that's the case, we would come back to you and have 3 separate buildings here. But there's not that criteria in front of us. And so what we're simply saying is it's the use and it's no adverse impact. We meet those conditions. And so to answer your question, I would go back, is it commensurate with the use? What we try to demonstrate is the use is very heavy and it has a large need. It is unique. It is different.
I think you bring up a good point. Is would the commission view this differently if it was 3 or 4 separate buildings that were smaller in size serving the same program?
Yeah, if it was a pole barn with 3 porta potties, we probably already had a motion on that. I think the intent of the legislation is not to have glorified commercial retail venues. I don't see this as that. I mean, it's really a pole barn that's enclosable. It's really a nice facility. It does accomplish everything that's in the purpose, and I would move for approval of the facility as presented.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Well, let me, can I clarify really quick? Is your motion to basically, would be to say that it falls within the exemption? Because we haven't gotten to the actually preliminary variance part. Okay.
It's eligible for the.
For under F.
Yes.
Yes, under exemption F.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
You cannot.
Remind me what happens if there's a tie?
If there's a tie, it's the equivalent of a no vote because you have to have 3 to pass any business on the board.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and I'm not hearing a second yet.
Can I ask some additional questions about the use? Because we spent so long on the first argument that I feel like we really didn't get to.
So motion fails.
The motion fails. Yep.
Yep. So then the motion fails. Yeah.
Unless anyone was going to second that and it wasn't. So can you tell me more about the anticipated uses for this facility? We briefly went over it earlier. I know that you all already have an existing structure there at the site that has a pro shop in it, that has facilities already for use. So by pro shop, you can buy ammo, you can buy clays.
Yes. Well, go ahead. I mean, part of the answer would be in
Right.
some of this.
So routinely, when they have the SCTP events, you have award ceremonies, you have meals, you have 3,500 kids on site, and virtually no covering. In the past, where covering was needed, they rented tents. And it's really not adequate for the population that it's serving. So on the charity events, they routinely have charity events where they will shoot the course, they will come off the course, they will cater a meal, they may have an auction. Those are the charity events. But for the athletic events alone, they're going to have, at SCTP, it's not uncommon to have 1,000 kids, their parents, their grandparents, following them around. And currently, there's no facility around that has the infrastructure to support that. And this, as much as anything, it's a much safer occupancy than anything else that we've been able to put together.
Maybe one distinction too, if you think about it in context of why do we not have similar structures for like baseball events or soccer events? Well, those facilities oftentimes are spread around multiple different locations. For something like this, and a sporting event like this, you just can't do that. This is a unique facility, athletic facility, that's one of a kind, obviously for the nature of what goes on there. And so, again, having a single structure that incorporates all these makes a lot of sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
Let me ask this. I'm not concerned about other events. I am focused on the recreational use associated with the athletic field for this particular facility. So what I'm hearing is that this is more of a shelter for those, like in competition, if they have friends, families, non-competing, this would be the shelter. There will be concessions that are sold, so there will be concessions even if somebody didn't bring in a non-catering based item. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
We would consider these supporting facilities for the athletic endeavors that are going on.
Okay.
I think if we
roll-up doors also provide the opportunity for people to gather when they're having, for example, they have a shoot-off at the end of a tournament. A lot of times, if there are ties, and those events are usually held in front of where this is located, it'll let people gather under cover and watch that.
I can get to it because we're running out of time. I would like to hear from staff on, I saw that they're claiming there's no adverse impact. We kind of had a very long discussion about floodway. I believe probably staff's interpretation is this wouldn't even fall within F. But if it were to fall within F, are there concerns about the adverse impact associated with this building being there?
The floodway is wide at this point. Y'all haven't done anything relative to no-rise studies and things like that.
Maybe I would just suggest one thing about that. I mean, thinking through this, if you think about something like a bleacher as one of the structures that's allowed in a floodway, that's kind of an interesting concept because that could actually float away, right? So even we
talked about that.
Yeah, even things like outhouses.
Chaining them down.
Right.
So it raises another question with me, though. When you look at the magnitude of this open air structure, in essence, a pole barn with metal siding, is the area within that building heated and cooled? Is it conditioned air?
In the open air section, no, that would not be heated and cooled. But I think the point I was going to make is that this is firmly rooted foundationally in the ground. So this would be a structure that's, I would say, on the sturdier end, something like a storage building, rather than something that could float away. So I mean, in that context, that's how we were looking at the no adverse impact. That it was not something that was going to be prone to causing problems downstream in the event of a flood condition, given its elevation above the floodplain.
It'll be founded on rock-bearing foundations. It's not going to float away.
And just to be clear for the commission, if we say they still have to go through the normal variance process. So we would
need to come back for a buffer variance if the appeal is successful.
Yeah, you would move on to part 2. So, I mean, you're not going to finish today with this one, regardless of where you get here.
That's where I was.
I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, I think that's where the adverse impact for staff would come in.
Yeah.
We would then migrate to the buffer equal or greater offset type.
That's what I was trying to think through. Okay.
Yeah, we're coming up under our time limit for this room. unless we get an extension, but I feel like we're headed towards a potential deferral.
I think we could vote as some, well, no, after the discussion, and I really appreciate the legislative intent behind everything. I have struggled with this one for quite some time, but after everything I heard today, after looking at the new changes that have happened to the specific code that we're looking at, I would move to say that this falls within the exemption, and they would then have the opportunity to come back to this board and present a variance request.
Okay, we had a motion. It's been seconded. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that motion carries. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't hear Mr. Oliver opposed. All right. Okay.
So back next month for variance?
Is that right, Logan? If we have space for them on the
we
agenda?
should. Yeah.
Was that a preliminary variance, though? I thought that
Correct.
you had, okay.
Preliminary variance.
The goal was to do it today, but yeah, we'll do it next month. That's all right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the good work. Yep. All right. Hey, that's the last item on today's agenda. So motion to adjourn. So moved. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.